Town Hall on Common Core and education. We would like to tell you that in early December of last year, we invited the Governor's Office, the Secretary of Education, the State Board of Education, School Board of Education in Delaware, the University of Delaware, David Coleman, the Rodell Foundation, and Wilmington University to participate in an open debate about the topic of Common Core. We realize there's been plenty of myths and mystery about this one topic, and we wanted to expose some light on it from both sides to have an honest civil discourse on this issue. The University of Delaware and the PTA agreed to be part of this in an open debate. 2 days ago, they both withdrew from the debate. In an effort to try to get some balance on this discussion, Ms. Judy Shore, if you'll raise your hand, Judy, agreed to fly in from Nebraska to support Common Core. We're sorry that we're going to have to change the format a little bit, but we felt that even if they withdrew with 2 days, there was no time to get more replacements, that we were not going to cancel the event. We decided to go forward. The Common Core people asked us to postpone the event, but we just feel that it's moving very rapidly, it's now in place, and that every parent and every teacher and every student deserve to hear this honest discourse. On the panel today, as we said, first is Ms. Judy Shore, who is an instructor in teaching teachers how to teach Common Core, and she is a supporter of Common Core. Sitting next to Judy is Kathleen Jasper. Kathleen is a teacher and was a teacher and a vice principal from a school in Florida. We have Dr. Sandra Stosky, who was one of the people who was on the development of the Common Core standards, or reviewed of the Common Core standards. And we have Dr. Peg Luxick, who has done extensive research on the Delaware implementation of Common Core and the filing of Common Core, and has many years in education, and they will explain themselves, their credentials. We asked the Women League of Voter to provide a moderator, and they said they could not. So Mr. George Ball has graciously accepted to be the moderator today. George has extensive experience in negotiations and events and some history in education. He'll tell you about that. We know that everyone here is either a parent or a grandparent or a teacher or a student or just someone who's concerned about education. Education is the most important thing we can provide our children. I can tell you my grandmother had 13 children, of which only 5 lived to adulthood. Actually, only 5 lived past the age of 6. And when her husband died, she married someone not out of love, she married someone who could provide, someone who owned a grocery store. My mother, when she was 16 in 1930, dropped out of school to take a job in a factory in New England to help feed the 4 brothers and sisters and our mom. Those women sacrificed for their children, each providing the next child, the next generation, something special and something important. So it's important for ourselves to ask now, with Common Core, are we sacrificing so our children have a better education, or are we sacrificing our children's education for a system that will hurt their future? This is an important question to be asked. There are people who honestly believe that each side is correct, and that's what they're here today. So we ask you to show them respect and courtesy. If you have a question, that's what that card, 3x5 card is for, to write down your question. And also know that on the back of your handout here, if you'll turn to the very last page, there's a survey that we ask you to take right now. The left-hand side is the pre-event survey. There's the exact same survey on the right side, which you will take at the end. If you need a pen, raise your hand, and Mr. Jason back there will come down and give you a pen. We're stalling a little bit while you fill out that survey. I have to tell you, apologize for an error that we had. Someone pointed out to me, John, are you going to cover the math standards? Because we have 2 sets of English standards. That was my fault. I sent them the wrong packet and then sent them to English instead of the English and the math. We have the math standards. And after this event, we'll try to get them copied for you. If not, if you'll take down this email, it's very simple. It's john@ffcdelaware.com. If you don't get that, just come and see me at the end and I'll give it to you. And we'll make sure you get the math standards, all right? So having all that said, we want you to know that we're thankful that you came here today. We know the weather was not the best, but this is an important topic. And again, show respect for the participants. And at the end, you have a 3x5 card. Again, if you have a question during the event or after the event, if you'll write that down on the 3x5 card, we'll collect the cards, and then George will pick from a hat and ask the questions to the participants. It's scheduled to go an hour and a half with questions. After the questions, if you feel that you want to hear more, the participants have agreed to stay longer. If you so choose, we'll take a short break after that, and we'll stay. And if not, you'll be able to receive a copy of the DVD of today's events by also emailing to that same address. There'll also be a video link on an email address that's ffcdelaware.com. That's Faith and Freedom Coalition site in Delaware.com. So ffcdelaware, spelled out, .com. Having said that, we'll now turn it over to the moderator, George Ball.
Thanks, John. We're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. There's a flag over there. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm sorry, we forgot one little thing. You all know who's talking to you. We would like to let the speakers know who they're talking to. So if you just, by raising your hand, are there any elected officials in the audience? All right, are there anyone who has run for office in the audience? How about mom and dads? How about grandparents? All right, so they know who they're talking to. We want to congratulate the youngest participant of 2.5 months back there in the end.
Teachers, aspect.
Teachers, I'm sorry, teachers. That was the other question I had. Thank you, teachers. Thank you. Thank you for coming. So we thank you all for coming, and let the process begin.
Oh.
School board members. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming.
All right, thank you. As John said, I'm George Ball. I'm going to be the moderator. Hopefully, I won't be saying much today. My job is to kind of keep things going on the agenda we've agreed to and keep things on a timely basis. When I sent out the program outline and some of the topics we wanted to cover, one of the speakers said, this is a great agenda for a 6-day conference. So we're going to cover a lot of territory on any one of these topics that we're going to go through. There's so much more, and I hope this is a beginning of a conversation on Common Core, not the end. And so just to let you know kind of the process of what we're going to do, the very first segment, we're just going to get an overview of some of the facts and the names and the dates of Common Core nationally and in Delaware. Followed that, where each speaker is going to tell a little bit about who they are and why they like or don't like Common Core. Then we're going to go into an issue of the local, state, and federal role of Common Core, both from the standpoint of its development and also once it's been implemented going forward. The next one is the quality of the English and math standards. So we'll just have a conversation. We'll divide it up between first the English and then the math and get the opinions on what they think of them and what they are. After that, we're going to go into the testing and where Delaware is right now, the pros and cons of it, and how it differs from No Child Left Behind and other authorizations. After that, we're going to spend just a brief time on data collection, and we'll go there to kind of the implementation phase, where we now are, and options to opt out. And then finally, what's next? And I'll get into that a little bit later. So that's all I have to say, and I'm going to go down there now so I can moderate. Thank you very much. We'll start with you, Judy.
Okay.
Can everybody hear me all right? If you could just give us a brief overview of kind of the National Common Core history, I'd appreciate that.
Okay. You can all hear me all right? Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be in Delaware. It's not any less wet here than it is in Nebraska, actually. So I'm going to give you a very brief overview of Common Core state standards. And this is what I call the vanilla version. The vanilla version means I'm not going to give you any opinions one way or the other about it. I think the more facts that we know about things, then the better able we are to make our own decisions about whether we like it or we don't like it, or do we need to change it. Do you agree with that? All right, so I'm going to just give you a couple of dates, no big deal, and a few names. In the year 2009, there was an initiative that was formed. It was called the Common Core State Standards Initiative. And it was formed by two major groups. The first group was called the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices. If you're wondering why I'm looking at notes, it's because some of those names are pretty big. And I want to make sure that I say them correctly. It's actually called the NGA Center. So from now on, if you hear somebody referring to NGA, you'll know they're referring to the National Governors Association, all right? We in education have a bad habit of using a lot of initials, and we forget that not everybody knows what all those initials mean. The second group that was involved in this initiative was the Council of Chief State School Officers. That's sometimes known as the CCSSO. Now, this is the group of people that are from our state department heads. So in Nebraska, I have a Department of Education. You have one here in Delaware. Before I came here, I went to the Department of Education website to find out information about what was going on educationally in the state of Delaware. So they actually have a conference as well. Overall, there are two general types of assessment that are being conducted as well. The assessment piece didn't come until just this year. And we have actually on the program a time when we're going to be talking about that assessment. So I'm not going to talk very much about it right now. Just know that generally there are two. One is called PARCC, P-A-R-C-C. And again, I'm going to read it so that I get all the words right. That stands for Partnership for Assessment of Readiness of College and Careers. And the second assessment group is called Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. There are other kinds of assessments out there that some of the states are using, and my friend here to my left will be able to talk about that since she's from Florida a little bit more. So just so you know, there is an assessment piece that does go along with that as well. But schools are just beginning to implement those kinds of assessments. One other piece I would like to give you, and again, this is just an overview. The primary purpose that we were given, and when I say we, that's me as an educator, a parent, and a grandmother, that we were given on why Common Core state standards were even considered was to develop better college and career readiness for our students. There's a group, you've all heard of the ACT test, right? So the ACT conducted, always gives all of those tests, of course, and in the year 2006, ACT conducted and put out a report called Reading Between the Lines. And when they did Reading Between the Lines, what they found was that while colleges in particular still were maintaining high levels of complex reading for students, that a lot of the textbooks in high schools across America were getting, for lack of a better word, dumbed down. And that the textbooks were lower in their reading levels, whereas the colleges actually were just as high or higher. And so one of the problems, of course, is when kids were coming to those colleges, they were unable to read some of those complex texts. So again, that is a reasoning that is given, and the last piece of information is that for those states that adopt Common Core, it is provided in the statutes that they can add 15% to the standards themselves. The standards are not meant to be the all-end-all, but you can add another 15% as a state if you would like.
Thank you. Peg, would you just give a brief overview of the history in Delaware?
Yes. Here in your state, the way that the Common Core standards came into each state is fundamentally following the same path. You need to know a little bit more about that path to understand it. In 2008, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation gave a grant for $2.2 million to the James B. Hunt Institute for the purpose of developing and promoting what eventually became the Common Core state standards. The Hunt Institute created a newsletter called Blueprints, and in that newsletter, they said that they were partnering with other groups like Achieve and the NGA Center and the Council of Chief State School Officers, and they listed about 11 other groups whom they said were asking for the Common Core state standards. An analysis of the funding of those groups showed that all of them were also funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, sometimes by as much as $34 million. So the Hunt Institute then received more money from the Gates Foundation to reply to the Gates Foundation call for the standards. And the Hunt Institute said they were partnering with Achieve Incorporated, and Achieve said that they were one of the leaders, they're a private nonprofit, in developing the standards, and they worked with the two groups that you heard about in developing the standards. In fact, if you look at Achieve's financial records, you will find that Achieve is the group that paid some of the lead writers for the standards using money from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. That then led to standards that were eventually promulgated in June of 2010. At the same time, the Obama administration, and I want to make it clear this is neither a Democrat nor a Republican issue, and we'll get to that in just a little minute. The Obama administration, in the stimulus bill, included a one-time appropriation to the United States Department of Education for $53.6 billion. It was called the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund. Delaware applied for that money and, in fact, received $134,865,607, if you're into numbers. In order to get the stabilization money, the state had to promise that you would do certain things. You had to promise that you would move toward the adoption of the standards, and you had to promise that you would implement a longitudinal data system to track the children. If your stabilization fund money was received and approved by the federal government, then you were eligible to apply for Race to the Top funds. Race to the Top was a competition. The states all applied, or 45 of them did, but only some of them got the money. There were 3 rounds of application. Your state received funding in the very first round of Race to the Top money. You got $119 million plus in Race to the Top funds. Your Race to the Top application was dated in January of 2010, and in that application, your state promised the federal government that they would adopt and implement the Common Core standards, which I just told you weren't made available until June of 2010. So in January of that year, your state Department of Education, in an application signed by the governor and your secretary, promised to tie every child in Delaware to standards that they had not yet seen. Every state followed that timetable. The standards were adopted by state governments, sight unseen, and were mandated upon every child and every teacher in the state before anybody saw them. In addition to Race to the Top, which was a competition, the federal government had a mandate. You've probably heard of it. It's called No Child Left Behind. It's a really famous federal law. No Child Left Behind is not a standalone law. Constitutionally, the United States government has no role in the education in your states.
One more minute on this one.
Okay. The way they get around it is they give money. That money was first appropriated in a law called the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or ESEA. When the federal government gives money, you give this much money for this much time. When the time is up, either the money ends or the federal government has to reauthorize the money. No Child Left Behind was the 2001 reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And No Child Left Behind required that every state prove by the close of the 2013-2014 school year that 100% of the children in your state would be proficient in math and reading. Well, that's impossible. So all the states asked for what was called flexibility. They wanted a waiver. And your state, in fact, in February of 2012, applied for a waiver. It's called an ESEA waiver, because No Child Left Behind is the continuation of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. To get the waiver, the state had to promise that they were either adopting the Common Core state standards or that they would adopt their own standards. But if they used their own, they had to promise 100% proficiency. So to get a waiver from 100% proficiency, you could either adopt the Common Core state standards or you could promise 100% proficiency. Is it any wonder that most states, including yours, used the waiver process to further solidify your embracing of the Common Core state standards and all of the ancillary pieces? So that's kind of where you are in Delaware. There was a carrot and a stick. You reached for the carrot and tried to avoid the stick.
All right, just so our audience knows, originally, how many, was it 45 states that originally agreed to Common Core?
45 states applied for Race to the Top money.
And how many states have originally adopted Common Core that have now backed out?
Oklahoma has backed out. Indiana tried to back out, but the new standards, so it's kind of in flux, but there's at least 5 of them who are now saying we want to get out, and
Okay.
more states have action across the country to make
Okay.
that happen.
All right, right now, we're going to go into a little bit about the speaker, your background, if you want to talk a little more about your background, and also how you, what you like about Common Core, what you do like about it, just so our audience knows where you're coming in on Common Core. And Kathleen, we're going to start with you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Kathleen Jasper. I am a former assistant principal, former public school administrator and teacher. I quit my job in 2014, right at the end of the year, to start my organization. I'm the founder of ConversationEd.com. It's a news aggregator and blog dedicated to education issues. I left my job because I saw major problems with what was happening in terms of the implementation of standards, not just the Common Core, but our Florida standards at the time, the amount of testing that was being imposed on students and teachers, and what we were doing with the results of those tests. We were penalizing students based on their proficiency levels on these assessments that some were not normed, and in my opinion, not an accurate measure of what a student knows, but rather what a student doesn't know. I believe that it is reasonable for a group of citizens in this country to come up with a set of standards that they would like children to be able to achieve. I don't think that this set of standards, however, was the result of parents, teachers, educators coming together and talking about what they believe would be good for them in their communities. Communities differ all over the country, and to assume that a blanketed set of standards is going to solve our education problems and our multifaceted problems in this country, including poverty and what's happening in our schools, is not just ambitious, but absolutely and completely irresponsible. The dependency on high-stakes assessments because of these standards has ruined education in my state and beyond. We see third graders vomiting before tests. We see teachers teaching to nothing but the test. All the autonomy and creativity has been stripped out of the classroom in my state. I can't speak for Delaware, but I can speak for Florida and some other states around the country. And I am here to be a part of this conversation, to start the conversation where it's not happening, and to talk to parents, teachers, and students about their rights and their choices in refusing the test, opting out, and boycotting what is a multi-billion-dollar business to make money off of the failure of your children. Thank you.
All right, Judy, your 5 minutes.
Okay, so my 5 minutes. So I got a phone call on Tuesday, and I was actually working at a school in Sarasota, Florida at the time, and John called me and said, hey, we're in a pickle here. Everybody who was supposed to speak on behalf of Common Core backed out, and your name was given to me as someone who goes around and actually works with schools in the implementation. Would you consider coming? And so I agreed to do this, and I will tell you that the reason I agreed to do it is because I'm all about always understanding what the facts are. So the reason I'm here is to speak on behalf of Common Core, but not because I'm emotionally tied to them. I speak on behalf of Common Core because in my job as an educational consultant, I don't make decisions about whether they're good or bad. That's not my role as an outside educational consultant. My role is if someone in California calls me and says, we have implemented Common Core and our teachers are drowning, can you come and help us? That's what I do. And so, do I totally believe in Common Core? I have to tell you, absolutely not. But do I believe in any kind of program that all teachers are expected to do? Absolutely not. But I also see a lot of good things in the Common Core. Now, I come to it from a more of a national perspective. You need to understand that in many states, like I think about Massachusetts, which has such, or did have such high state standards. You know, I would wonder why they switched over to Common Core, because they already had really high state standards. But I go to some other states, and I probably shouldn't name them by name, but I work in almost all the states in our country. And we have some states that prior to Common Core, their standards were so low that when and if those kids went to college, those colleges were having to build in readiness, reading and math readiness classes, because the kids did not come to them prepared at all. Very low standards. So I think if you look at it from a national perspective, not just in our own narrow view, you know, look at my state. Nebraska is one of those few states that opted out. They said, we don't want your money, just like Texas did, just like Virginia did. We don't want your money. We have really high standards, but I will tell you they had to jump through a lot of hoops in order to be able to keep their own standards. What I'm saying is this: there's good in everything, and there's probably weaknesses in everything. And when I go in and work with a school district, my purpose is helping teachers and administrators understand how can we do the best job we can with what we've been given. So I'm typically not on this kind of a panel saying, yes, I believe in it, or no, I don't believe in it. Again, I think there are strengths and I think there are weaknesses. I am not at all in favor of standardized testing, never have been. But I do a lot of workshops on brain-based learning. And if you know anything about the brain, you know that standardized testing in any event, whether it's now or years ago, is not in the best interest of our students.
Thank you, Judy. Sandra, 5 minutes?
Thank you. Let me first indicate my own background credentials for talking about Common Core's standards. I was over 10 years ago in the Massachusetts Department of Education, where I was responsible for the development or revision of all of our K-12 standards in all major subjects. I was also responsible for completely revising our teacher licensing regulations and our teacher licensure tests. All of that was part of what I coordinated, and that is what is one of the major issues basically missing from today's so-called reform scheme. I also, years later, became a member of the State Board of Education in Massachusetts at the time that Common Core's standards were being developed, and I do know from being on the state board in Massachusetts what happened on a state board in response to what our commissioner was telling us. And he was being wooed regularly by the U.S. Department of Education because they badly wanted Massachusetts to adopt Common Core standards, a point raised by the previous speaker, and I will address that in a few minutes. But most recently, I was on Common Core's validation committee, 2009, 2010. I was the only English language arts standards expert on that less than 30-member committee. And Professor Milgram from Stanford's mathematics department was the only mathematician on that validation committee. And we were 2 of the 5 people who would not sign off at the end of the year saying that Common Core standards met the criteria that had been outlined in our original charge. We did not believe, and we indicated with our own analysis of standards, he did the math, I did the ELA, that they were not internationally benchmarked, which means they're not comparable to the best that's out there. They're not research-based, and they're not rigorous. This, of course, is the opposite of what is being told to this very day by many of the people supporting Common Core standards. But in any event, the point I'm making is that I was there from the inside, and I have been, and Professor Milgram has as well, for the past 5 years to 6 years, we've been writing critiques about Common Core's standards. Has anything changed? Not a word. They were frozen into stone 6 years ago. So far as we can see, they will be in cement for the next 100. There is no mechanism for changing them. Indeed, they have been copyrighted by the 2 private organizations that developed them, CCSSO and NGA, 2 of the groups that you were told about before. And while we have been testifying to state legislatures about the problems in these 2 sets of standards, and you have at least one sheet double on the problems with the English. The math didn't make it in, but there will be available to you the handout that Professor Milgram makes available called Missing, Delayed, or Muddled Topics in Common Core's Math Standards. This is what John was referring to at first. These will be available to you afterwards. He's now expanded his 2-pager to a 6-pager, just to give you more details for those of you who think you can understand more than just the standard algorithm issue, which is a major issue in K through 7. But he goes into what is missing in the high school standards, which are critical for STEM careers: science, technology, engineering, and math. And the handout that will be made available to you will go into all the topics that only people who understand math, science, and engineering can really understand. I don't, because I'm not a mathematician. Let me quickly go through some additions to the very good outline that Judy gave you of the history. I wanted to make it clear that, first of all, the testing consortia that are now doing most of the work across the country to develop tests for this year were funded by the USDE. That was one of the constitutional questions that has been raised by critics. USED, or DE, gave some of the stimulus money that had originally received to these 2 different privately developed groups for developing Common Core-based tests in 2010.
1 more minute.
And then states were asked to join either one or both. Gates funded, by the way, the development of Common Core, and we should not underestimate all of the different groups that the Gates Foundation has funded, including the PTA, which 2 days ago backed out of appearing here. You should understand that this is rather startling for a group 2 days before this supposed to be an event to back out without providing a substitute. But it is one of the many Gates-funded groups that promote Common Core. There, so far, is a question that I think all of us should ask about part of the history that Judy gave us, and that is when state boards adopted Common Core standards, not one, because I testify before many state legislatures and have asked this question, not one asked the legislature for cost-benefit analysis. This is on record, not one. And yet, in many states, any bill that's being proposed that has policy implications must have a cost-benefit analysis. Not one did. And two, not one state board asked its own higher education experts in math, engineering, science, or in literary scholarship for advice on the college readiness level of Common Core's high school standards. One would have thought they would, because it's the first time in our history we've ever had
Okay.
standards called college readiness. Most of them are just plain
10 seconds?
standards. And then I would like to make it clear that it's to this day, it's not clear if any states really are backing out of Common Core. I'm involved with almost all of them directly. And so far, the states that have tried to come up with alternative standards are coming up with a warmed-over version of Common Core, no matter what they call them, whether they're called Sunshine Standards
Florida.
or whether they're called Pennsylvania's academic standards, they're still Common Core.
All right, thank you very much.
This is a serious problem.
All right,
Thank you.
Peg?
Thank you all for coming today. I didn't get a chance to say that. I know the weather isn't good. I came in yesterday, so I beat the storm. So for those of you who drove, good for you. Congratulations. My basic information is in the program, and you can all read. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on that. Briefly, I'm a teacher with over 35 years' experience. I've taught everything from preschool through college, and I worked for the United States Department of Education, and my job was to review and evaluate education reform initiatives. So this isn't new territory for me. What I want to talk about is what's really at stake here, because there are different levels of conversation, and we need to understand all of them. One level is, are the Common Core standards themselves good or bad? They're bad, but we can talk about that. At a deeper level, what the federal government did, first in No Child Left Behind, and then continued with the ESEA waiver process, was say that they were going to mandate achievement. This isn't universal access to education. This is the government saying, every child will learn this information on this schedule to this degree. Is that possible? Well, let's see what happens. This is the audience participation portion of the program. Stand up. Wiggle your tushies while you're up there. Exercise is good for you. Okay.
You can tell she's a teacher.
This is vocal performance. When you can meet the standard, you can sit down, but you can't sit down until you meet the standard. Are we ready? All right. Luciano Pavarotti, considered one of the greatest tenors of the 20th century. Anyone who can sing like Pavarotti can sit down. Soloist with the New York Met. Chorus member with the New York Met. Soloist with the Regional Symphony. Chorus member with the Regional Symphony. You can't see each other, but nobody has sat down yet. Soloist with the church choir. Sings in the church choir. Oh, a couple seating. Sings in the shower and enjoys it. Can't carry a tune in a bucket. Can't find the bucket. Okay, we even have one who didn't even sit down at that. So now we're mandating achievement, because you remember that's what this is saying. Every child must achieve and must prove that they have achieved proficiency at this level. And states have to prove that they're meeting bars for proficiency, and children have to meet this level in order to be promoted or graduate. Where am I going to set the bar for vocal performance? Well, where did you all sit down? That sings in the shower and enjoys it. I'm a teacher in a classroom. There is no reward whatsoever for me to have any child move one step beyond sings in the shower and enjoys it. But there are huge penalties for me and my school if every child doesn't get to sings in the shower and enjoys it. So where is the classroom teacher going to spend all her time? With Mr. and Mrs. Can't Carry a Tune in a Bucket out there, getting them up to sings in the shower and enjoys it. What about the child for whom the standard should have been Pavarotti? That child walked into the classroom already able to sing in the shower and enjoy it, so they will pass the test. Did education succeed for that child, or did it fail? It failed, but it's a silent failure. What happens to Mr. Can't Find the Bucket over there? Well, he gets ignored too, because the teachers cut their losses. They have to. They try to get as close as they possibly can to that 100%. So in fact, studies on this standards-based approach to education, one published by the National Research Council in Washington, D.C., actually say that when you use standards-based education, the goal does not become enlightening a child, the goal becomes reaching the standard. And teachers spend all their time focusing on the children immediately above the standard and immediately below the standard. The kids at the top are forgotten, the kids at the bottom are ignored. Achievement gaps do not shrink, they grow. And the research also says that all of the instruction shrinks to the test.
30 seconds.
So the underlying concept is, can we mandate achievement by government fiat? And is that really where we want education to go? So as we're discussing the content of the standards, you need to look a little deeper and say, why are we applying a manufacturing model, total quality control, to the children of America?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I probably would have been still standing. What is a bucket?
You know, a bucket.
It was a joke, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to show my credentials.
So you would have been one of the people at the
I
bottom
would
of the list.
have been after that guy. What's a bucket?
Still looking for the bucket.
Yes.
Okay,
I'll have to
you know,
that category.
thank you all very much. As you can see, there are gaps in our podiums up there, because we don't have anybody right from Delaware. We're going to use Peg to kind of, because he's most familiar with Delaware, to always try to fill in where is Delaware on this. And we're also not perfect in terms of pro and con, because as you heard Judy, she's somewhere in between. But we're also going to go to her to kind of say, well, what does the pro look at it? So it's imperfect. These people are perfect, but the total panel is not ideal, and we had no choice in that. So now we're going to go to the next issue, which is local, state, and federal role in Common Core. We're going to just spend a little bit of time on this, maybe 4 minutes on the first part and 6 on this next. The first part is whether the design and initial adoption was driven by the federal level or state and local levels. And second part is, regardless of the roles to date, does the adoption of Common Core change the balance amongst local, state, and federal levels for control of education? And what are the implications of that? Who would like to go first on that one? All right, Sandra?
I'll just go briefly because it's almost well known beyond belief at this point that what we are seeing is the centralization of power in educational decision-making. This is removing whatever the authority of a local school board is, which really has not changed in several hundred years, whether one was a colony or part of a territory before becoming a state. But it does mean that local board authority has been apparently weakened, and state boards of education and state departments and commissioners of education have been more or less empowered as the U.S. Department of Education begins to assert more and more authority over not only the standards, but now there is an attempt to even think about a standardized curriculum. And this is simply recently within the past week. But I will stop here because it's all part of a candidate's proposal for what that candidate would do with national defense, urging K-12 curriculum for the entire country that would bounce off of Common Core and be a totally national curriculum for the whole country in the name of national security. This is a very different approach to national security because, as Professor Milgram has said, national security depends upon our having more people in the STEM pipeline, and we are actually shrinking that one very, very dramatically.
Okay.
I'll stop.
Judy, from your perspective, you've done a lot of work with various states and school districts. Were you involved in the early part of it, that you can comment on whether or not the standards change the balance, and what do you think is going to happen in the future?
Well, I have not been involved since the inception. I came into it a little bit later. But I actually do feel that it's become more of a national issue, obviously. I mean, anytime you have something that's designed at the national level and then it's sent out to the folks, that is more national. The problem I have is that I don't think it would have to be a non-local issue. I don't think it would have to be a non-state issue. It's just when the federal government ties money to anything, then that's what changes everything. Money changes everything.
Okay, Kathleen, you have a comment?
Really quick, Judy was talking about how ACT got together and decided what college readiness really was. ACT and the Governors Association, if you follow the money, these things bring more money to these companies. So when ACT decides that college readiness isn't up to par, they then have a stake in the tests that are made, the books that are published, and the money where it's allocated. So it's very, very important when you hear, the National Governors Association, Achieve, when you look at Achieve's board, there's not one educator on that board. Most of those people are from Prudential. These are money-making machines, and so it's very, very important that when we talk about whether it's PARCC or Smarter Balance or the AIR test or whatever your test is here, that you follow the money, because there are hundreds of millions of dollars being given to these companies. And so when you talk about who was in charge of implementing this and how it started with ACT deciding that students were not college ready, you have to really understand what the motivation behind this kind of government program is. There were hundreds of millions of dollars at stake, and in Florida, we got one of the largest awards with $770 million.
Okay, thank you. Peg has a comment. Also, if you could address...
I'm going to take it to Delaware, yes.
Yeah, but also, the other question is, if you can do it in 30 seconds after you do your Delaware part, whether or not, since we have a fair number of
Looking at
teachers here,
podcast.
do you think that teachers gain or lose flexibility and power to design curriculum and adjust to the needs of the students in this process? So,
Okay. Let's start with the talking points. When you go into a Common Core website or you talk to state officials, and it's very sad that your state officials decided not to come today to actually speak to you about what they're doing to your children. That's quite unfortunate. I have, however, spoken to many state officials, and what they say often and in writing is, this isn't curriculum. Has no effect on curriculum. These are just standards. And so you have all the local autonomy you want. You can do whatever you want at the local level. And that's the talking point that you hear over and over and over again. So let's examine that. Standards that don't have curriculum behind them are not worth the paper that they're written on. If the standard is everybody has to know their times tables, and you walk into my classroom, you're going to see me teaching times tables. The federal government, through this system, is controlling the standards. And since the federal government is either funding the consortium, as you heard, or states that have their own tests must submit their state assessments to the federal government for approval before they can use them, the federal government is controlling the standards and controlling the test. Let me explain it this way. Here's a chocolate cake. Can you all see my chocolate cake? It's a wonderful cake. 3 layers, sprinkles on top. I'm a really good cook. The standard is everybody has to make a cake that tastes just like my cake and has the same texture as my cake. And the assessment is, I'm coming to taste your cake. Now you can have any recipe you want, but it better taste just like this cake. So how many recipes can there really be? Well, 1, because if you change anything, then it won't taste the same, and it won't have the same texture. So when the federal government grabbed the standards and grabbed the assessment, they also grabbed the curriculum. They followed that up with very punitive measures. Here in Delaware, and you're not different than any state, as part of your Race to the Top grant application, you had to say that you would participate in what was called a turnaround initiative, which if the schools did not measure up, if local schools did not measure up on these assessments, it would be one of 4 levels of turnaround. The lowest level was that the school would have to hire a new principal and replace at least 50% of the educational staff. Now, a reasonable person would wonder if these are math and reading assessments, why you would have to replace the band teacher, or the gym teacher, or the music teacher, because it's 50% of the staff.
1 minute.
The highest level says that the school can be closed, and the children then sent to other schools or charter schools. That's a huge amount of control. Teachers who are faced with, if I don't have my kids pass this test, I'm going to lose my job, lose all flexibility in the classroom, lose all ability to do what they need to do in a classroom, because they want to keep their jobs. So basically what we've done is change teachers from people who interact with kids individually to assembly line workers, who are there to put kids on a path to pass the test on the right time and remediate. We've basically removed from teaching the ability to teach. Everybody loses when you do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, we're moving on to item 4 here, which is we're going to get into the actual standards, the English and math standards. We're better represented on the English background in terms of who our panelists are, but we're going to muddle through math standards also because they're very smart people. Kathleen, do you want to start with the English standards?
Sure.
And we'll spend about 15 minutes on each and keep everything like 3 minutes, and we'll move on to other people.
I'll just talk a little bit about grades K through 5. My specialty is in high school, and I teach at the College of Education. However, I have been analyzing the K through 5 ELA standards and find them, and there's research behind, saying that they're developmentally inappropriate for our youngest learners. One of the biggest problems with the quality of the ELA standards is that many of them were mapped backwards from what they thought would be good for high school. And in the experience that I am seeing with teachers having with these standards is that in kindergarten, for example, there are 90 total standards for students to master. And a lot of those have to do with reading and writing and skills in reading and writing that young students do not have the ability to do. So, for example, if I make a standard for you to fly, and if you don't fly by the end of the day or the end of the year, then you can be held back or be penalized for that, is unreasonable, especially for our youngest learners, because what we are asking our youngest learners to do is developmentally impossible. I will give you my own personal experience as a mother. My daughter, who is 5 years old, she attends kindergarten in Florida. We do have the Florida standards, which just is a rebrand of the Common Core, like you had mentioned, Dr. Sandra Stowski. And she came home with the standard highlighted, and I have read the standard, but it was to perform an argument-based essay at 5 years old. My daughter has not been on the planet long enough to develop experiences for her to create any type of argument. And when you looked at the paper, you saw that she had actually filled out the lines. And my daughter, of course, is a genius, just like everybody thinks their kids are. But I know my daughter did not write what was said there on her own. I know that the teacher had prompted her, and because the teachers are under tremendous stress to get the students to basically fly before they even know how to walk or crawl. So I see some of this happening in the third grade classrooms because of the problems with the quality or the intensity, I would say, of the ELA standards at the young level. Third grade teachers are just hammering skills in. We call it kill and drill, where they stand in the front of the classroom and kill it until the students can get it enough for a progress monitoring test, and then it's gone. One of the biggest problems with the K through 5 standards, in my opinion, my professional opinion, is that they are the skills, if the students do attain them on some basic level, that skill attainment is unsustainable. They will not be able to hold on to that skill set long enough for it to benefit them. And although I do believe that backwards design is something good when you're planning instruction, when you look at the ultimate goal and how you need to get there, I don't believe that in this situation it was good for our ELA standards because they are beyond what our youngest learners can
Kathleen,
do.
when you're talking about backward standards, are you referring starting at
graduation and mapping backwards.
Okay.
Starting at college readiness, and I argue that not everybody wants to be college ready, but starting at college readiness and mapping backwards, and what happened in many states is that we just weren't ready for that for our youngest learners. So they have been under tremendous pressure to achieve on these standards that
Okay.
just are developmentally inappropriate.
Thank you. Judy, what are you seeing out there?
So going back to what she was talking about, that's the UBD model. It's called Understanding by Design. And a lot of the teachers in the room, I'm sure that you use that when you plan. It really means plan with the end in mind. So it means know where you're going, and then how are you going to get there. So you back out your planning in order to do that. And what I'm finding is, again, I'm not a math person. I do most of my work in the literacy area, but also not just with English language arts teachers at the elementary level. I work at the secondary level a lot with the literacy anchor standards. And the anchor standards in grades 6 through 12 are based on the English language arts strands. And so those standards would be based on reading, writing, speaking and listening, and language. And what they've done is they have designed these to accompany the regular standards that teachers that teach history or other subject areas, science, etc., excuse me, would incorporate into their instruction. Excuse me. And again, let me give you a little bit of my information about that. So she talked about the elementary. I'm going to talk about the secondary. At the secondary level, anchor standards, I am finding, are actually helping content area secondary teachers. Now, why? Because when I go back to 2 years ago, I filled in as a principal of an inner city charter high school in Chicago. When I got there, I discovered that about 2/3 of our 9th and 10th graders could not read above a 3rd grade level. Their math scores were as bad. It was a charter system, and it was designed to be a pre-college school, and definitely at that level it was not. So we had to figure out ways to help our content area teachers include reading strategies, writing strategies, speaking and listening, etc. We were in the process of incorporating Common Core at that time. And what we did was we went in and did really a lot of professional development, a lot of sustained. You cannot expect anybody to just suddenly change the way they've been doing things without helping them know at least how, why, and give me some strategies. And so as a principal, I did a lot of professional development for my teachers and helped them with the anchor standards. The anchor standards helped their students become better readers in their subject areas. As they became better readers in their subject areas, I suddenly had social studies and science teachers coming to me and saying, "Mrs. Storr, my kids are better at social studies now." Really? Well, yeah, maybe it's because they're starting to be able to read the text. One of the things that Common Core focuses on, which I totally agree in, whether I was doing Common Core or not, is stressing vocabulary. If you do not understand the vocabulary that you're reading, it's pretty hard to read. The brain research shows that there is a direct connection, and the teachers in the room know this, there's a direct connection between fluency, that means can you read it smoothly without stopping 14 times, and comprehension. If I have to stop all the time, by the time I get to the end of the sentence or the end of the paragraph, I haven't a clue what I read. If some of you are like me, when I got on the plane yesterday, I opened up the United magazine and I started reading, and about halfway through the first article, I thought, I don't have a clue what I just read. I was not even focused on what I was reading. And so one of the things that we do through the Common Core strategies is called close reading. Teachers in this room know what that is. Close reading means you're reading for meaning, you're reading for comprehension. You do a lot of vocabulary instruction in the process. Now, if you're an elementary teacher and you've been teaching a lot of English and language arts and reading, you do all that anyway. But many of the teachers that I work with in the secondary and high schools, if they're not trained in reading, okay, if they're not trained in reading, they don't know how to do that. It's not that they don't want to, they don't know how. And so through the Common Core anchor standards, that gives us a path that we can help them. My ultimate goal is to help students.
Great. Sandra, your comments.
Something new with Common Core. Accountability itself came to be a major concept with No Child Left Behind, which was, as Peg was trying to explain earlier, a reauthorization of ESEA, which began in 1965 as part of the War on Poverty by President Lyndon Johnson at the time. With No Child Left Behind, accountability as a concept became very powerful. All of us want our public officials or public servants to be accountable. Under No Child Left Behind, it meant that schools and school districts would be accountable for children's scores on the tests that were required under NCLB. What the Obama administration or Secretary of Education Duncan did was push the envelope a little bit more and say, it won't be just schools and school districts, it will be teachers who will be accountable. That's a huge push, but it was not ever analyzed or commented upon by anyone because it is, of course, totally unfair to teachers and it changes the dynamics of a classroom, which needed to be examined. So let's at least understand that we have flawed standards in both ELA and math, and the only person held accountable is the teacher for teaching them. Now, imagine this as a situation in most classrooms. You've got poor standards to begin with, but you're going to be damned no matter what you do. You're held accountable for kids' results on the tests that are based on these standards. And in English language arts, most of them are skills. They are empty skill sets, which means that somewhere a curriculum has to be found, actual texts that the teacher teaches. That is where Common Core-based consultants come from. In Fayetteville, Arkansas, she was paid $200,000 a year to tell the English teachers what texts they might teach, so that then those empty skill sets could be assessed on a Common Core-based test. There are other problems, and I won't go into the details because they're all on that page that's titled Flaws. But you do have to read through them. This is an analysis I've been making for 6 years. They are unclear standards, and I give an example, and they are not fewer, clearer, and deeper as the claim has been. And I give you examples from both California and Massachusetts, which had better standards to begin with. One of the questions that was raised earlier, I'll answer it very briefly, how come Massachusetts gave up its first-class standards? Well, $250 million is a nice carrot. That was what we were promised under Race to the Top, and Governor Patrick was a friend of President Obama, and it was very clear to the rest of the Board of Education that we were going to get that $250 million if we abandoned our standards. We did. And we got the $250 million. It was used up by last year. That was the last year of Race to the Top money. There isn't any more. And instead we have waivers, which are even more of a constraint upon schools because, as you've heard, they require schools to adopt either Common Core standards directly or a set from their own higher ed people who've approved them that will guarantee proficiency for everyone in the whole state, something we've never achieved and no other country in the world has ever achieved. Let me move from these empty skills in ELA. The math you're going to have to struggle through yourself. I'm not a mathematician. I have the long version, you have the short version in front of you.
We'll do math in a minute, so we'll finish.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about math afterwards. But let me get to the close reading issue and literacy. Close reading I have myself criticized because David Coleman, the chief architect for Common Core's English Language Arts Standards, studied at Yale, and he should have known what close reading was. It was a technique for reading poetry. It was developed by two people who were eventually on the Yale English faculty, Cleanth Brooks, Robert Penn Warren, you may recognize the last name, and they developed close reading as a way to look at poetry, decontextualized. Well, it was not a technique for looking at informational text. That's where he moved it without any justification. And he's moved it there even with his so-called literacy standards. That was his idea too. He's admitted that in some workshop that is available for YouTube to show that this is indeed his idea. Because as history teachers have pointed out, one of the major skills you want students to learn when they look at a primary source document, they need to start with contextualization and sourcing. In other words, what was the historical context for the Gettysburg Address? Who said it, when, where, why? And was it actually what President Lincoln wrote? Those are the primary skills a historian wants students to understand. And those are not what David Coleman wants students to come to the Gettysburg Address asking. He wants decontextualized cold reading. So we have some really bizarre pedagogical practices being spread around the curriculum by these misbegotten English language arts standards. I will say a few words now, I guess, if I have
We're going to
time.
do math second. So
Math
just
is
let that go.
second.
Yeah, he's going to do math as a whole second topic. So just.
Oh, I thought it was both sets of standard, I'm sorry.
No, we're going, first we're getting all the English comments,
back to
then
math.
we're going to go back to the math.
Oh, you're going to come back to
Right.
that? Okay.
I-
Then let me ask you to look at the specific difference. in
30 seconds?
I'm sorry.
30 more seconds?
Look at section 3. And please look at the example of a true content standard from California and from Massachusetts. And then, in the first paragraph, look at the empty skill standard from Common Core to understand what kind of a difference teachers are facing that they will be held accountable for. Okay.
Great, thank you.
And can I just state really quick that Coleman is now the CEO of ACT?
Thank you.
You should just know that.
Peg, if you could give a
College
brief
Board.
comment on the English and then lead off.
Sorry, I'm sorry, you're right, College Board.
Yes, I can. You heard a little bit about the early, so we'll finish up English, and then I'm just going to roll into math, because I'm sort of I've taught math at the college level, so I guess that makes me the expert on the panel. When the standards were being adopted, a statement was signed by more than 500 early childhood professionals. 11 copies of it were hand-delivered to the writers of the standards. Those early childhood professionals included educators, pediatricians, developmental psychologists, researchers, the 3 past presidents of the National Association for the Education of Young Children. Their statement said, "We have grave concerns about the core standards for young children. The proposed standards conflict with compelling new research in cognitive science, in neuroscience, in child development, and in early childhood education about how young children learn, about what they need to learn, and how to teach them in kindergarten and the early grades." That statement was ignored. The Common Core standards you heard about kindergarten begins to push and sort of drill and kill reading in kindergarten. There is no research anywhere that says that a child needs to learn to read by the age of 5 to succeed in later life. In fact, children develop at all different rates, particularly at the earlier levels. Boys especially tend to lag behind at the early grades. They catch up, but because young men don't, I have 6 children, and they're all girls, except for 5 of them. And so I'm real familiar with how little boys behave, and sitting still isn't high on their lexicon. So the standards are in this pushing, this artificial timetable is particularly harmful for our youngest children. Now, sometimes it leads to hilarity, and I'll tell you a really funny story, and then we'll move to math. So you get these skill-based standards, and we're going to really push the particular little discrete skill. And so, and this is a real story, a teacher wrote in that we're supposed to work with prefixes. So the prefix was RE, so readmit, admit again. And she went through this great big lesson. And when she was done, She said, we're going to take a break. And the children all went, oh, we're going to cess again, because we're going to recess. See, 5-year-olds don't think like grown-ups. They're not just grown-ups small. They're completely different. So the standards don't take any of those things into account. That's a funny story. But imagine a child being forced to try to think abstractly before they're able, which leads me to math. The math standards have lots of problems, and math is incredibly important. So let's start with the early grades. We'll work our way up to how they start wrong and then continue to go wrong. And then what do we actually know about the importance of teaching math? So let's start in the early grades. In classical education, we recognized that little people are concrete thinkers. We also recognized that what do little kids want to be most? Big. How do they know they're big? They know stuff. So we taught concrete skills to concrete thinkers. We taught addition facts and multiplication facts. We taught them how to do it, and what we did was we gave them the ability, we told them we want you to memorize these facts. Now, the reason that we wanted them to memorize, 8 and 7 is 15 and 8 times 7 is 56, is so that the skill would become automatic. Our moderator is keeping time. If I said to all of you, what time is it? You would all glance at your watch, and a time would pop into your head, but your train of thought would not be interrupted. Your time would pop into your head, you would answer me, and we would continue our conversation. You did 7 things. I know, I've taught kids how to tell time, and the first time I did it, I was like, wow, this is really complicated. But it is automatic for you. It's so, you've done it so often, and you know it so well, that the skill is automatic, and so your mind does those things without you even having to think about it. The reason that we worked in the early grades to make addition and subtraction and multiplication automatic was so that when you got to algebra and trig and functions and calculus, and you were trying to solve a big problem, and you came across 8 times 7, you didn't have to stop and draw 7 rows of 8 sticks to figure it out. But we don't give kids those skills anymore. The standards don't talk about making it automatic. They don't teach the concrete level to the concrete children. Instead, we're saying things to 6-year-olds like, why is 2 and 2 4? Now, if I asked you why is 2 and 2 4, most of you would look at me like I came from Mars, and some of you would laugh, because when you're confronted with something you can't do, adults respond to embarrassment with laughter. And you're able to look at me and say, well, what's the difference? As long as I know that it is, who cares why? There really is a reason why 2 and 2 is 4. In fact, there's several constructs for that. A 6-year-old doesn't know any of them. But we are putting these little people in classrooms and saying to them, explain to us why 2 and 2 is 4. Well, they can't. It doesn't matter if they're smart. It's an abstract and rather convoluted concept that no 6-year-old or 7-year-old can embrace. But they can't evaluate the system. So when they're confronted with that, the only place that they can go is to say, I'm stupid. And unfortunately, I've heard this from children all over the country. As a matter of fact, a clinical psychologist in New York testified in front of the New York Senate Education Committee talking about how we're asking children to do things that they're not developmentally, even physically developmentally, able to do. And as a result, she has 6-year-old children cutting themselves because of the stress. Now, when we move to the higher levels, it goes the other way, because Common Core slows the math progression down. In fact, a document written by the National Center for Education and the Economy called What Does It Mean to Be College and Work Ready actually says that Common Core means middle school math and Algebra 1 by the end of your sophomore year in high school, because community colleges begin with Algebra 1, so there is no reason to learn more than that to go to college. And since most jobs don't need anything more than Algebra 1, it's a waste of time to teach it. Trevor Packer, the senior vice president of the College Board, who works for Common Core architect David Coleman, actually attended the American Association of School Superintendents, and he said, and I'm going to take more than a minute, Common Core slows the math, I know I'm Irish. Common Core slows the math progression down, and that calculus is not part of the Common Core strand, progression. Is that a good idea? You know, the U.S. Department of Education actually does study education. And in 1999, they conducted a study, it was called Answers in the Toolbox, that said what leads to success in college. And what they found was that if children get beyond Algebra 2 in high school, they more than double their odds of being able to get a bachelor's degree in college. That study was part of a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is where researchers, instead of doing their own study, they go out and read all the other studies that were done to see if they can find trends and patterns. Auburn University did a meta-analysis on this same topic. They looked at 25 years of research, which is a huge analysis. And what they concluded was that if kids get to calculus in high school, they are 28 times, understand I didn't say 28%, I said 28 times, that's 2,800% more likely not just to succeed in college, but to be a high achiever, regardless of race, socioeconomic status, the kind of high school you went to, or the major that you take, because the skills of higher math translate. Now, does that mean every child should take calculus? No. Does that mean every child should go to college? No. But it does mean that any responsible educational entity should be setting educational policy that is designed to give every child possible the chance to go as far as they can in math in high school, because high school math opens doors of opportunity in college and beyond. How is it that the U.S. Department of Education that knew this in 1999 didn't know it in 2014? This, ladies and gentlemen, is educational malpractice, pure and simple.
All right. Anybody else, anyone else like to comment on the math part? Sandra, we're going to have to truncate the times a little bit at this point, but go ahead.
You cut me off whenever you want. You have it doing. That's fine.
I'm used to being ignored. In fact, there's a new program called No Moderator Left Behind, and I'm the first enrollee on that one.
Well, you see, I come from a tradition where the moderator's word is law, open town meeting,
Yes, I
or
appreciate
representative
that.
town meeting in New England, and what the moderator says matters. Otherwise,
Thank
the
you.
microphone is removed, which you can't do, so.
Right, well,
you can shut me off.
I'm pretty quick. I'm pretty quick, just so you know.
Let me just add a few more things as general questions, because some of these have been puzzling to me and may be puzzling to the audience. First of all, we have to ask why there's been no pushback to these dreadful math standards from higher up. One would expect, at least for the people who do understand the problems, engineers, scientists, and mathematicians, and more at the college level, to say something. We've heard from nothing, basically, at the college level, which means that the shoe is still going to drop there when they're told by the presidents who are asked to sign on to the Race to the Top applications that, indeed, they must give credit to students who are deemed college ready on a grade 11 test, which will be coming in the next year or so, that if they're deemed college ready, then they get credit-bearing courses in their freshman year. Well, if the college level of readiness is somewhere between grade 8 and grade 9, that means that the 4-credit course in their freshman year is going to be following that. It doesn't mean that they will be ready for STEM career. It only means they will be given college credit for what they should have been doing in high school for high school credit. This is a way to get rid of high school almost altogether. But let me pick up the higher ed piece of it, because we had a letter that was distributed in 2013 on William McCallum's website and through others. He was one of the math standards writers and is a professor of mathematics at the University of Arizona, in which the heads of almost every major math and science organization in this country endorse Common Core. It turns out that the letters went only to the heads, didn't go to the members of the organization, and the heads were only asked to endorse. It is not clear that any of them ever read the standards, and yet we have this letter that's going around. It's available on the Pioneer Institute website, so one can see it. Professor Milgram got a copy of the letter and saved it, as he saved everything, so he could say, it's only the heads. No one in the organizations who belong to all these organizations
One quick interruption.
ever knew what was going on.
Sandra, could you just say what Pioneer Institute is so people know?
Pioneer Institute is a free market institute in Boston that has commissioned and done a lot of reports on anything to do with free market policies and programs, including the nature and problems with Common Core.
Okay, thank you.
But they do many other things. Part of what we have to understand is why more than math people also are unaware of the tentacles from this, because science is critically affected by the shortcomings in the high school math standards. In fact, no next generation science standards, NGSS, and I don't know whether Delaware has also decided to adopt them too. They are in line with Common Core. They do not teach a full course in high school chemistry, and physics is unteachable. So that is part of the problem that you need to understand by your state board's adoption. How did it know? It doesn't know anything about high school science, like it doesn't know anything about high school math either. But you cannot teach advanced high school science courses in chemistry, mathematics, or certainly any other area that it would want to. So where were the questions? Where are the local school boards raising questions? They will be told they can do whatever they want in their local schools. It's just as we've heard, there's no
1 minute.
incentive for them to do so, since those new standards they've added will not be assessed by a Common Core test. But why are American high school students being penalized when students from other high-achieving countries are being taught these standards and are graduating from their high schools and coming to our country, as Professor Milgram says at Stanford, because American high school students are no longer being qualified for the STEM careers that students in South Korea, China, Japan, and others
Singapore
are being trained for. We will have Chinese-speaking town engineers. Those
Thank
are the
you.
only ones who will understand what they're supposed to be doing, even if you can't understand what they're saying.
Judy, do you have any comments on this?
I really don't do very much of the math. I only talk to groups briefly about, the actual purpose, and what I know is that the design is that their math standards are twofold. And so the twofold is there is the practical standard side, that is, how do you do it, what is it, and then there's the conceptual side. And I'm a big believer in the conceptual side. I'm a big believer in a lot of people learn like I do. It's easier for me to understand how to do something if I understand why it works or why it doesn't work.
And does Common Core do that? I'm not sure.
Common Core, what we're told, and again, I don't teach math, so I only know this through my own research, is that it has two different kinds of standards, an entire group of math practice standards, that's the actual application, and then there is the whole grouping of conceptual standards, which means understanding why it works or why it doesn't work.
Okay, thank you. Kathleen, do you have any comments?
I just believe that, and while looking at the math standards, that there's a mix-up between what rigor and more work is. The standards tend to talk about rigor, and I believe that, in my own research, that they are using more work as rigor, and that's not what
That's
rigor
not
is.
what rigor
And rigor is not a good word to be using in education anyways. Rigorous is a negative word, but they're confusing the two. It ends up being more work, but not necessarily acquiring a specific skill necessary to move into the STEM careers as the two
Okay.
doctors to my right. had talked about.
Kathleen, we're going to start with you. We're going to move on to testing.
Oh, my favorite
Right,
subject.
that's why
to
you're
talk
chosen for
about.
this. So there are a lot of issues in the timing, the control, administration, the quality, educational implications. You can start this off.
Okay, the first thing that you need to know about testing is that it's all about money. There are hundreds of millions of dollars in this state and beyond that are tied up in testing. Testing companies like Pearson have some of the biggest lobbies. They rival some pharmaceutical drug companies. And what they do is lobby Congress and legislators to pass laws that make more tests a reality. So, for example, with No Child Left Behind, I'm going to use Florida as an example because that's where I'm from. With No Child Left Behind, there was one test for math and reading. It was called the FCAT. Every state had their own. I'm sure in Delaware you had your own test. After testing companies lined up, and just like anything else, when roads are being built because of a federal grant, whatever the reason is, if there's federal money out there, contractors will line up to get their hands on that money. And that is what happened with the testing all over the country, and has increased enormously under Common Core. And so back when No Child Left Behind was put in place, companies like Pearson, Harcourt, McGraw-Hill lined up to make the exams for these particular standards that you had in each state. After the contractors saw that they could make lots and lots of money, what they did was they pushed for laws to be made for more tests to be necessary. So under Race to the Top, there's a lot of content-specific portions of Race to the Top, meaning that you have to be able to have equally rigorous courses and tests to assess those courses. So in Florida, there are things, not just the FSA, which is our PARC exam. It's the same thing to assess the standards. But we also have end-of-course exams for every single subject area. So not just you have your reading and math like we used to have. We now have Algebra 1, Geometry, Biology, Civics, which ends up to be U.S. history, and then they are now in development of art and music, because art and music teachers were not being held to the same accountability standards as the math and the reading and the biology people were being held to. And so, to be fair, they now need a test for art and music and all that. What that means for Pearson, who makes the EOCs in my state, they will stand to make even more and more money. Now, every time a student fails that test in high school, there are graduation mandates in many states, and so you have to be proficient on these tests in order to move on to get your diploma. Some kids who do not gain proficiency end up getting a certificate of completion even when they have the GPA and all the requirements met. So if a student fails in Florida any of those tests, they can be denied a standard diploma. What we are also seeing is a high rate of third grade failures on these exams, and the projected failure rates for the Common Core test based on the New York administration and other administrations field tested in Utah and around the country, we are seeing upwards of 69 to 71% failure rates on the PARC exams, which we are, in Florida, we are bracing ourselves for a very high failure rate because our population is high migrant and minority population. The test was field tested in Utah. If you go to Florida, we don't look anything like the people in Utah. And a good researcher knows that when you're field testing something, your sample should, and when I say look like, I mean just be like, your sample should be like the one you're actually going to be administering the test on. Utah, I believe, is 71% affluent, whereas in many places in Florida, we are at 99% free and reduced price lunch, and poverty matters when you're talking about testing. So one of the biggest things that I would encourage parents and teachers and people to do is to follow the money. Find out who makes the test in your area. Find out which politicians they have in their pockets. Find out how much money each test costs, and find out the failure rates. So for example, in Florida, we have been under 14 years of accountability and testing. We've moved 10th grade reading proficiency up 1 percentage point. We have not increased the reading proficiency in 10th graders at all. And so, and they're designed that way. There is a failure rate built into the test. I've spoken to psychometricians that work for Pearson. There's a failure rate built into the test. And the more the students fail, the more money testing companies gain, because you have to keep paying for those tests to be retaken. And when you're talking about large districts in states who are paying large sums of money for these tests, you're talking big bucks for testing companies. And I'll just end on one thing. With the Race to the Top grant money that my panel members here discussed, most of that money is gone and is spent. However, under the mandates of No Child Left Behind and in terms of Race to the Top money, we were supposed to implement a rigorous evaluation system for both students and teachers. What that is doing to our states is bankrupting our state of education and our local education boards, because the amount of infrastructure needed to implement these tests, computer-based and beyond, is completely unsustainable. And what you see happening in high schools and in elementary schools across the country, because we cannot keep up the infrastructure, we don't have the bandwidth, we don't have the amount of computers we need, students are shuffled into an auditorium like this to sit all day while the other half of the building tests. So you have students testing all day and then students sitting in an auditorium watching movies all day. And I know this because I worked in a high school. And so you are losing valuable instructional time. We also have our media centers that are closed half of the year because they are used as testing centers. The computer labs, they are used as testing centers. And any new money that your Board of Education is spending on computers and innovative technology, that's just new technology for more testing. If you're getting little iPads, they're testing. These are used for testing. If you're getting new computers, so that's more money. So every time you calculate the cost of the test, you also have to look at how much money your Board of Education is spending on new infrastructure like computers and tablets.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
John has asked us, we're going to take a 15-minute break, and when we come back, we're going to go over to Peg to just give, on the testing part, where Delaware is at the moment, and then we'll get back to everybody else, the rest of the folks commenting. So 15-minute break.
Hang on, folks. The panelists, if you'll just stay for a few minutes, the media would like to interview you before they have to go to session.
Oh, okay.
And now, this is the time where, ladies and gentlemen, you fill up the section part of your survey. So when you get your survey and your questions, would you get them together? And you'll see Jason back there. Jason, raise your hand. You can drop them off to Jason, all right? So 15 minutes, and please be back. We'll start promptly. What? All right, thank you. And now, I'll ask the panel and the audience. Our plan is, because you've all been expressing how great this is, to go for another half hour with the moderator, and then a half hour with answering the questions. Is that good with everybody? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. We're going to get back to the testing part right now, and at this point, Kathleen has one more topic she wants to discuss briefly, and then we'll go over to Peg.
I just have one thing to say about the test obsession in this country in terms of the Department of Education, especially Mr. Duncan and his topics of being globally competitive and being able to compete globally. When you look at the countries with the highest PISA scores, you're looking at countries that do not have the highest entrepreneurial skills. You're looking at countries that are really good test takers and not very good at taking risks, becoming entrepreneurs, and thinking outside of the box. And I've been doing a lot of research in terms of China's model of standardization and standardized testing. And when you look at and you talk to their officials and you talk to their schools, they're running away from the standardized model. They are trying to get away from it because it has ultimately hurt them. And so when you're looking at the Common Core state standards, you're not only seeing maybe standards that are flawed or not developmentally appropriate, but you're also looking at a standardized curriculum, which in and of itself is a problem. And then when you attach high stakes assessments and you determine whether or not a student goes on to fourth grade or whether or not a student receives a diploma or whatever other penalty is attached to those tests, you're looking at a dire situation. And so I just want people to understand, we're talking about being competitive globally all the time. That's like the buzzword also with college and career readiness. But what is it that we want to do? Do we want a nation of really good algebra test takers? Do we want a really good nation of kids that know how to read boring reading comprehension passages and answer ambiguous questions that I myself have a problem answering, and I'm a doctoral student? Do we want a nation of good test takers, or do we want a nation of entrepreneurs, people who think outside the box, people who want to do something different, not just get on the assembly line? Some do want to get on the assembly line, and there's nothing wrong with that. But a standardized curriculum and high-stakes standardized tests stifle the creative process, and the other countries that have this model, who have had this model for a long, long time, they're running away from it, and we're running towards it, ignoring the problems that they have faced over the last few years.
Thank you. All right, Peg, tell us just briefly about where Delaware is with testing, and then you can talk in general about testing.
Okay. Delaware, in your state, you recently moved
She's not
from-
on.
Michael.
It says it's on. Oh, there it goes. Okay. It recently moved to there's two testing consortiums. There's the Partnership for the Assessment of Readiness of College and Careers, which is PARC, and then there's the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. Your state recently moved out of PARC and into the Smarter Balanced Consortium. They were supposed to have legislative approval before the fact, but they did it and then sort of kind of went to the legislature after the fact, which is backwards from what you are legally supposed to do. Now, you adopt a Common Core in your Race to the Top grant, remember, was in January of 2010, and so you've been changing and moving into this model, and we heard all about how this was going to improve achievement in Delaware. So I pulled your state assessment records, and what I did was I compared how many kids passed on your state assessment and then put it against the national assessment, because the national assessment is a normed test. So it's given nationally, the people there, they don't care how you did. So they have no interest in manipulating the numbers. So in grade 4 reading, your state assessment said that 72% of your children were proficient. When those same children took a grade 4 reading test in the national assessment, 47% of them were proficient. In math, your state, in the national assessment, in the state assessment in grade 4, 73% were deemed to be proficient. When those same children took the national assessment on what should be the same content, 49% were proficient. Are you hearing a big difference in these numbers? In grade 8, in your state assessment in reading, your state test said 71% were proficient. When those same children took a reading test on what's supposed to be the same material, only 37% of them passed. So that's a drop in the NAEP of 10 percentage points in passing between grade 4 and grade 8, which means achievement's going down as the children get older. In math, 65% at the state level, and when those same children took the 8th grade math test in the NAEP, 41%. Again, it's going down from grade 4 to grade 8. 49% pass. By the time they get to 8th grade, only 41% are passing. The NAEP numbers haven't changed significantly in more than 10 years. So with all of this additional money and all of the hoopla, just as Catherine said, the numbers aren't changing, but one number is changing, the achievement gap, and it's getting bigger. The kids at the bottom are farther behind than they were before you started this system, and that is very disturbing. So that's kind of where you are in Delaware. Now, I want to follow up what Catherine said about testing itself. As I told you at the beginning, when I was in grad school, I was the grad assistant for the psychometric testing clinic. So I know a lot about how these tests are administered and how they're supposed to be constructed. And what you hear always is that these are valid and reliable assessments. Those words are supposed to mean something. There are actually definitions in testing for valid and reliable. And your assessments don't meet them at all. The first thing we know in a valid test is that the only thing you're supposed to measure is the thing you're testing. And you're supposed to eliminate all other variables. But when children walk into a testing situation, you have no idea what that child is bringing to the table that day. Maybe their dog died last night, or they didn't sleep well, or they're sick. In any given big testing population, about 10% of the kids are going to have a factor that will interfere with the reported score. It really won't be a measurement of how they do. It will be a measurement of something else. You know, they had the flu but didn't know it yet. However, The lower the socioeconomic level of the child, the higher that percentage goes, because they're more likely to have had an upheaval in their family or in their neighborhood or poor nutrition or some other factor that is going to interfere with their ability to take the test. So you're not measuring their academic achievement, you're actually measuring their socioeconomic status, which means the score is at best meaningless and at worst discriminatory. Additionally, particularly in the math assessments, it's what's called constructed response assessment. So the child is given a math problem, and they're supposed to solve the math problem, and then they're supposed to write about why did you solve that problem the way that you solved that problem. And they're scored not just on how they did the math, but on how they wrote about it, which means it's not a math assessment, it's a writing assessment. That is also discriminatory. It's discriminatory in some ways that you don't think about. If you ask a little girl to say, why did you do this way, a little girl will tell you all the things she was thinking about, probably starting with what she had for breakfast that morning. If you ask a boy, 3 of my sons are engineers. If you ask them, why did you do the math the way you did it, they would write, because that's the way it worked. Mm-hmm. And what they wouldn't write but would be thinking is, you dummy. What do you mean, why did I do it this way? It's the way you do math. So boys will do not as well. Children with ESL, where English is a second language, may actually understand the math, but they can't write about it because their English skills aren't as good. Learning disabled children. Learning disabilities, they're either English or math. Sometimes kids have them across the board, but more often you see them clustered in one or the other activity. So kids who can do the math may have a learning disability that affects their ability to communicate in standard English, but they're going to get a lower math score. And kids from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, who again may understand the math, but don't communicate as well in standard English. But nobody knows that that lower math score had nothing to do with their ability to solve the problem. It was more a measurement of their English ability, but they're now going to be put in math remediation. Now, do you remember how we talked earlier, Common Core slows the math progression down, but higher math is the biggest door to college success? So kids in these kinds of testing situations are going to be slowed down even more. So kids from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, kids with learning disabilities, ESL kids, will be put in math remediation because of a deficiency in English, which means their math progression will be even slower than Common Core. That's discriminatory on its face. And it is an endemic problem with this testing situation that has never been addressed, has never been talked about, and yet it is undercutting everything that we're doing in education. It will make the achievement gap get bigger for reasons that have nothing to do with the achievement of our children.
Thank you. Sandra, what is your opinion on this?
I have some remarks on testing that may be a little fragmented. First of all, let me provide some facts on the 2 major international tests that are available with a recommendation for Delaware. There are 2 international tests. One is PISA, Programs for International Student Assessment. This is a test given to 15-year-olds, and it is a test mainly of skills. We don't do that well on it, but this is the one that Finland did very well on, that sent it to international fame about 10 years ago. The other test is called TIMSS, Trends in International Mathematics and Science Survey. That is a test of the curriculum. It is the best international test out there because it matches what seems to be the curriculum and tests at grades 4 and 8. This is the one Massachusetts has entered as a country twice. It was in 2007 and then in 2011. And Delaware could enter as a country. It will be the only test that gives you independent information on how your kids are doing in math and science. It is not the one favored by the USDE. They want to go with PISA, not TIMSS. But having looked at the 2 tests and having mathematicians who've looked at the content of the 2 tests, they will tell you there's a huge difference because PISA tests math content that is about at the grade 4 level. Remember, it's testing skills for 15-year-old. What the average 15-year-old or adult needs to know and be able to do. That is not what the high school curriculum needs to know. Now, let me give you some other facts about the tests that are coming. They will be very lengthy. We already know that the time involved may be from 7 to 9 hours overall. That's a lot of time for testing and teaching to the test. Secondly, they are very costly, as we've heard, and that is where the big money is being made, in the technology that's needed for the infrastructure of these tests. But I have been asking about, and still cannot give you information on, what the college readiness level means in grade 11, when the test will be given that has high-stakes consequences for credit-bearing courses at your post-secondary level. In math, mathematicians have estimated that Common Core standards end up at about what they would call Algebra 2 light. The test will have a cut score, which has not been determined. If it has, it hasn't been announced.
Define cut score.
Cut score is the pass score. That's going to be a little lower. So if the math coursework that kids take under Common Core goes up to about Algebra 2 light, the pass score will be somewhere between grade 8 and grade 9. That's what you have to understand as the important ultimate score that your kids are going to be judged on. In English, we do not know what the reading level of the passages that are going to be on the grade 11 Smarter Balance or the other test, PARCC, because they only give you a few examples, 2 or 3, but they could be cherry-picked. We still do not know, which leads to the other problem. Massachusetts had on its statute, because it had an excellent Ed Reform Act in '93, that said all used items had to be released for public availability after the tests were given. In that way, everyone in the state could look at all test items to see what their kids had been assessed by at any grade level, certainly for the high school competency determination tests, which took place by law in grade 10. You're not going to know anything on Common Core's tests because nothing is going to be released. First of all, the items will be in computers and they're not going to be made available. Teachers will have no way to see the items that were used. Parents will have no way to see the items that were used. This is why the accountability issue for teachers is very difficult to understand, because the teachers have not seen the test items before it's given. They're given to their kids. They will not have had a chance to develop them, to vet them. All of these things they did in Massachusetts. I don't know what happened here in Delaware with the old test, have no knowledge or information on the process followed. But under these Common Core-based tests, no teachers will have had an opportunity, or higher ed experts, to even evaluate the test items. So you are being given information in the dark without any way to understand what that information means. It's a test score. Somebody understands and determined what it would mean in terms of who shall pass, who shall fail, but why? We don't know. You should know that those parents who opt their children out, if you can do it beyond a 95% participation rate, that makes the test results invalid. A lot of parents in New York State know that. If you get below 95 participation rate at any grade level for any test, that makes it invalid, the results. That's what you aim for. Let me just briefly go back to ELA again, because this is where I focus on. We know that students going to college should be reading at least a high school level of reading. We have no information as to whether the test items, passages that will be used, will be even at the high school level. Many of them may be at the middle school level. There could be a legislative bill or whatever you would develop that indicates that students who want to go to your university system, and I don't know the structure of higher ed in Delaware, that students who want to go need to be able to demonstrate on some test that they have high school level reading skills and high school level math skills. Then you let your higher ed people work it out. It's their determination, because they're the ones that teach most of your kids as they do in most other states. I've been saying this in every state. Use your higher ed people who are on the public payroll and get them to work out matriculation tests, which is what a lot of countries in the rest of the world use for determining what kind of a higher ed system the kid can go to based upon how well they can read and what level of math knowledge they have. It's not a skills-based test. It's content knowledge and reading ability and mathematical ability to do whatever is needed for certain majors. Without that, you're in the dark and you will be paying through the nose.
I have one quick follow-up question, Sandra, for you. We haven't talked about it before, and I don't even know if there are any homeschoolers here.
Oh, homeschoolers.
Does the testing or any of this affect the capacity to do homeschooling?
No, thank you for raising homeschooling as a question, because we don't know what's going to happen. Right now, in just about every state, homeschoolers can do whatever they want, for the most part, from K up until high school. But they do not know yet what is going to happen when their children want to go on to college. Will they have to pass a college-ready test? If they take SATs or ACTs, they have all been aligned to Common Core. So we don't know yet. This is part of what Will Estrada, who's the legal counsel for the Homeschooling Legal Defense Association, is now negotiating with Senator Lamar Alexander and Representative John Klein from Minnesota as they work on the reauthorization of ESEA. That is taking place as we speak,
Right.
from day to day. And any of you who are on school boards or in the legislature or know people who know either of these two gentlemen or know others in Congress today can put in your 2 cents worth about leaving homeschoolers out of the whole equation altogether.
Okay,
That would be the
Right
only.
now, homeschool is governed by state law,
okay.
and so it's every state has its own regulations, and that's what the Homeschool Legal Defense Fund is attempting to protect.
Okay.
So that homeschoolers only have to deal with their state legislatures, and it gives them way more ability to direct their own destinies.
All right, thank you. Judy, do you have any experience in terms of helping school districts or teachers with the tests?
I mostly know a little bit about the PARCC assessments. As they were saying, there's not a lot out there yet for us to be able to preview, although some of the schools are starting to get involved with that. I have to say, and I'm going to say this again, you know now how I feel about standardized tests. Whether it's Common Core or any other kind of standardized tests, I don't like them, all right? I don't think they're accurate. I don't think they're brain-based, and I want to go back to something that you said earlier about entrepreneurship. One of the reasons that so many countries around the world send their students to our colleges is because they want them to learn to think creatively. Now, I want you to think about that. I travel around the world. I do workshops in Germany and Japan and Korea and all of those different countries, and everything is lockstep there. And they send their students, and I've done workshops for some of their school principals even, on how do you get students to be more creative? How do you teach that? How do you integrate that? So I think as a country, we need to remember that one of our 21st century skills that we want kids to learn and to keep is that entrepreneurship that she spoke about earlier. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a risk taker. I think outside the box. I've owned my own company for many years. And I reinvent myself every 2 or 3 years. You have to do that. Today's students, we're being told by futurists that today's students are going to change entire careers once they're old enough to have one, 10 to 12 times in their lifetime. How many of you have changed entire career, not just jobs, but entire careers 10 to 12 times? That's a lot. And so we need to be thinking about how do we get our kids to be 21st century thinkers and learners. And Common Core Parts of it are part of the problem, and parts of it, as you have heard, I have some things that I think are good about it. One of the things, as I have looked at the PARC examples that I've received, and again, this is English language arts, one of the things that I think is a good thing is the examples that I've seen are not multiple choice, and they're not true-false. Why is that important? Because a lot of kids, the way they get through a standardized test is, I'm going to mark all C's. Anybody here know anybody that's ever passed a test that way? If you mark don't know, or or if you just go C, 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 and my choice was A, B, or C, you know, some of the answers are going to be C. And that's how some kids get by with standardized tests. One of the positives that I've seen with PARC, and again, I am not pro standardized tests, is that the English language arts tests are not multiple choice, and they're not true or false. Instead, students have to read a passage, and they have to write about it. They have to analyze it. So the standards of analyzing it, looking for evidence, we know that another 21st century skill is doing research, identifying what's important in what I'm reading and what's not important in what I'm reading. And so that's that's the shape that it's taking. Now, on the other hand, that means who's going to check these things? Because you're not going to be able to grade that with a simple, machine that goes, oh, they've got all the A's, the B's, and the C's. And so that's another whole problem, of course, is who's going to be testing, or not testing, but who's going to be checking all of this and making the decision of that's a good answer or that's not a good answer. But just from an integrity point of view, that piece of it I like.
I need to answer that.
Very quick.
When you go to the PARC website, the kids can use a spell checker when they take the English language arts assessment, which means they don't have to be able to spell, because the computer will do it for them. You would think that being able to actually spell correctly would be part of the assessment, but the computer's going to do that for them. So when you look at it, you need to look at all of the pieces, and the assessment is already telling us that they've lowered the bar, because they don't even have to be able to spell, and the grading rubrics say, do not consider grammar. That's a problem.
Do not consider what?
Grammar.
Do not consider grammar.
I ain't never heard that before.
Yeah, I have it from New York. I actually have the scoring rubrics. I
neither
started
you.
pulling the scoring rubrics, and they're told they're scoring, not grading, and do not consider grammatical biases, that as long as you can understand what the person said, if the exact quote is, if the spelling or grammar errors do not hinder comprehension, you should not count them. So if I wrote a sentence that said the letter B, the number 4, the letter U, the number 8, do you know what I said? So it would be correct,
Are
wouldn't
you
it?
texting over there?
Unfortunately, it goes with the texting
It does.
mindset, but that's not standard
Hey,
English.
we're going to stay with you briefly.
Okay.
Our next topic, a very important topic, but there's a lot that is essentially unknown on it. So we're just going to highlight it. It's data collection. And so we just briefly talk about Delaware on data collection, very brief. We talked about a minute and a half.
When your state took the stabilization fund, you were required to create a P through 20 data system. P is preschool, K through 12 is what you think, 13, 14, 15, 16 is college, 17, 18, 19, 20 is the workforce. It feeds into a national database, and I'm actually looking at, it's the United States Department of Labor, which is where you find it. It's called the Workforce Data Quality Initiative, and I'm going to read you just what it says. It supports the development of or enhancements to longitudinal databases that will integrate workforce data and create linkages to education data. States will incorporate workforce data into their longitudinal data systems. The long-term goal for states is to use the longitudinal data systems to follow individuals through school and into and through their work life. Main objective, enable workforce data to be matched with education data to ultimately create longitudinal data systems with individual level information beginning with pre-kindergarten through post-secondary schooling, all the way through entry and sustained participation in the workforce and employment services system. So it's a lifelong database. In Delaware, what you guys have, it's called the Student Success Plan. And I'm going to, again, read it to you so that I get it as accurate
Yeah,
as possible.
30
And this is
seconds on this.
right off your Department of Education website. By 8th grade, your kids have to have a student success plan, which will determine what they're going to do when they get to high school. And it says that it's mandated by the state. It is a personalized plan, including tracking, to ensure a student is on track to graduate with a plan to enter the workforce or college courses. By 8th grade, they use all of the data they've been collected along with aptitude inventories to give the kids called a career matchmaker, a list of careers that the state has determined are correct for your child. Your child must choose from that list, and then all of their high school is designed to make that happen. And according to your state's website, parents can view their child's student success plan, but they cannot change it.
Okay, we are,
Where are we?
I just spoke to John. We're just going to
audience here?
truncate the next two parts very, we're gonna
We are not ready. The amount of, they want them computer-based, the test computer-based, because it's cheaper for the companies. They don't have to print paper, they just deploy it on the computer. And so we are not ready for the test administration that's
Thank you.
coming.
Sandra, what are the options to opt out? 1 minute.
The options, one can opt out one's child, period, anywhere, by law. You don't need to ask. This is the point. Parents have the right, as they have always had, to keep their child at home. If their child is sick, they don't want the child to go on a field visit. And if they don't want their child to take a particular state test or federal test, they can either keep their child at home, or they send the child with a little note pinned to the collar saying, I want instruction for my child instead of testing. That's all they have to do. We don't know that there would be any consequences because none has been voted by a local school board as yet. They are the only statutory group that could set consequences for children who do not show up for a test. And so far, this has not happened yet, so we don't know what consequences there could be. But there are forms, if one wants to find a form, on the Pacific Institute website, one for California, one for other states in the country. But parents don't need any form. They simply exercise their right as parents. This is going to be contested in the next few
Yeah,
years.
Just real quickly, if I recall that there have been a fair number of opt-outs in New York. Can you describe that in 20 seconds?
New York State has had thousands of students who were opted out by their parents, and it has become serious in New York State. But this was for the transition test
Yeah.
to the ones that are going to be given this year. So we don't know what's going to happen
They're
this
aiming
year.
at 250,000. They actually have organizations
got a
in place.
goal.
They're aiming at 250,000 opt-outs. Last year, they had over 60,000 kids
Wow,
opt
okay.
out.
All right, now for Judy Mpeg, you're going to answer the same question. And this is kind of what next, and the two parts of it. And
I didn't know.
how practical is it for a state to scrap Common Core at this time? Or would it be better to modify Common Core after several years of experience?
I'm going to
Judy?
let Peg start that.
Okay, you start that.
When we know, for example, that psychologists are testifying in front of education committees that children are cutting themselves because of the pressure of Common Core, why would any sane person say we're going to continue this for a couple of years and then see? We're already seeing. We're seeing the results right now of children in pain, children who are suffering, children who are calling themselves stupid. Would any of you say our children are being poisoned? you know, we really aren't quite sure if it's going to kill them, so let's give it a couple more years and see if it works. Of course not, how silly. This system has no research based, and we are immediately seeing children in pain, additional
Okay,
costs.
very quickly.
We need to get them out today.
Follow-up question, very quickly. The other part of it is that there are two sides of debate on, could it be, state that like in Delaware that's already gone this far, how practical is it to go back, to set a different standards that would be as good, easily?
It isn't just changing the standards. You know, sometimes when you have a crisis, it gives you such an opportunity to say, well, what do we really want to do? So why don't we actually have a conversation about what does work in education and what doesn't work in education? Shouldn't we be concerned about our children instead of letting the people who foisted this upon us say, well, until you come up with an alternative, we're going to keep doing it? When Merck was giving Vioxx to patients and it was shown to cause death, was Merck able to say, well, until you give us a viable alternative, you have to keep taking Vioxx? No. If what they're doing is wrong, we as the consumers should and have every right to say, you fix it. You come back to us with an alternative, and we'll tell you if we want to buy your product or not.
Okay.
These are our children. We should be in charge.
Okay, thank you very much. Sandra, this is in 15 seconds, I know you have a perfect soundbite for it because I've read your articles. 15 seconds, explain your view of it.
It's going to cost us even more to maintain and test Common Core than it would be to get rid of it immediately and to either adopt, if we're still under an ESEA injunction to have state standards, which, as I say, is up for review right now, but it would be cheaper to adopt what we know were one of the best standards, and there are several states that had much better standards than what has been given as the grading for Common
Okay.
Core, and
you
it
very
would be
much.
cheaper.
Judy?
And so because I'm supposed to be here to support Common Core, thank you very much, John, for making me feel like a duck out of water. I would...
We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. I guess I would suggest that we all need to slow down. And what I see is everything happens by crisis in this country these days. And we don't deal with something until it's right in our face, and then it's like, oh, we got to stop that and shift gears. What I'm concerned about is if we suddenly stop everything, somebody else is going to come in, and it could be worse. I always, years ago, I worked for a company, and we just despised our manager, despised him. And then he got fired, and they hired someone worse. My point is, don't just assume that just because they're going to throw that out, that it's going to get better. I always believe in transparency. I'm a person of integrity. Let's be honest with each other. My point is, you know, if I was God and I was making Delaware again and the whole country, I would say, stop. And let's look at what it really is, and let the people who know and who teach, the teachers in this room could have written better standards than anybody for Delaware, right? I don't know about you teachers, but I wasn't asked. And that's what I do for a living. I write books. I write curricula. I was a principal. All of those things, nobody asked me. I'd like him to stop, and I'd like to regroup.
Great.
Because I am a believer in the United States of America.
All right, Peg,
Okay.
12 seconds.
12 seconds.
12
You
and
know,
a half
our
seconds.
founders already solved this problem. They said the federal government should have no role in education.
That's right.
We're supposed to be having 50 different conversations. So step one in solving this is to tell Washington bureaucrats to get their fingers off our children.
All right, great, thank you. All right.
George, before we start with
ahead.
the questions, so we just want to go over the survey, because I know what's going to happen here. As soon as we finish the questions,
You're gonna
these
run.
poor ladies are going to be mobbed. First of all, Judy, thank you for your courage in standing up. Peg, Sandra, and Kathleen, you're absolutely marvelous, and thank you for coming here to do this. Listen, we want to reach a lot more people, so we talked to Kathleen, and we're going to talk to Sandra and Peg and Judy. We're thinking about in either late summer or the fall, putting together a one-day workshop on Common Core, and any of that day's activities with a panel, a true debate discussion on Common Core. All right,
Yeah, I
let's
don't
see if
wanna
we
be
can get
alone this time.
people from Delaware to come up and do that. So, what I mean by a true debate is that we're going to have equal opponents and equal supporters, and really get this. So I'll give you the survey results, and then George's going to go to the questions. Position on Common Core. Before the start, 37% supported it, 60% opposed it, 3% was undecided. The only change in that was that all but one of the undecided switched to oppose. So the opposed gained 3%, and the support stayed the same. For who do you trust with your children's education? One person said the federal government, one person said the state government, everybody else said local school boards. After the debate, or the town hall debate.
Whatever it was.
The only change was that the undecideds all moved, almost all but three, moved to the local school boards. So almost all of you think that local school boards should do it to the tune of 98% after the debate. Supporting empowerment scholarship accounts, which are education savings accounts, whatever you want to call them. 58% supported them, 4% were undecided, 38% said no. The change was dramatic in that over 13% of the undecideds moved to supporting individual empowerment scholarship accounts. So there has been movement, and these things make a difference. And ladies, thank you, and we want to have you back in the fall if you all come back and have a full session. To the school board members and the legislators that showed up today, thank you very much. To the ones that didn't, shame on you. All right?
I agree with that.
To the teachers who showed up and care about their students, and we know the teachers, thank you very much. Please take the word back. We believe that you are the basis of educating our children. You're the ones we trust, not the federal government, not the state government. So with that, George will ask the questions, and we'll be available at the end. Those that oppose Common Core, Senator Dave Lawson is here, and Senator Dave Lawson in Delaware was the only one with the courage to introduce a bill to completely stop Common Core. And there's a petition in the back to support Senator Lawson, so if you want to sign it when you're done, please do so. And again, thank you very much.
How much time do we have for questions, John?
Ladies, how much time do we have for questions? Half hour or
Yeah, I'd say
hour's
half
plenty.
hour.
Okay.
half hour?
All right, and it may be that one of you may want to stay around a little longer, and you can tell me at the end, and people can come up to you and talk individually.
And George, one other thing, we also want to thank George. It wasn't easy going up against these four strong women.
Good job, George.
Exactly, yes. Just like home. All right, just to show that how impartial this is all going to be, you're Karen, is that correct? Karen has volunteered to pick out the questions, and I'll read them. I don't know they may be good questions, bad questions. We may spend a little time on one or more. And so I don't know what's going to happen. Karen, thank you very much. Oh, this one's from George Ball. Okay. There are four questions. I'll start with one. I probably will need to give one person, one question per person. Oh,
This is called You Have to Write Legibly.
okay, this actually.
So
gets-
don't take cursive writing out of the
What
curriculum, please.
organization canceled for this town hall meeting? Why were their names not included with the handout? I think that's really more for John, actually.
John,
John?
He's coming.
he's coming.
Okay.
Sorry, George, what was the question?
What organizations canceled for this town hall meeting, and why were their names not included in the handout?
The University of Delaware Department of Education canceled out their participation, and the PTA canceled out their participation, and they're not on the list because we were told to remove their names from the program. So that's why you see the program you have instead of the program we wanted to put out. We had to take everybody off that was not going to be part of it.
Okay?
By their request, not ours.
All right. Karen, next question. All right, we went over this a little bit, and so maybe Sandra can address it just a little more, but I think we've pretty much covered it. How do you opt out? And what percentage need to opt out to disqualify test results? And is it making a difference in states other than New York?
Sandra, Dr. Stusky, if you don't mind, I have led several people through the
Okay,
opt-out
sure,
process.
great.
And I just want to make sure people understand the difference between leaving your student home and actually invalidating the test, because there are two different ways that you can opt out of standardized assessments. One is what Dr. Stusky said, which is to leave your child home. Unfortunately, testing windows can go 2-3 weeks at a time. And when your child comes back to school, because of the 95% mandated rule, they will try to test your child anyways. So the best way that you can opt your child out of standardized assessments, still participating in the standardized assessment, is by invalidating your test. And this is what takes a lot of gumption and a lot of persistence to do. Most principals and teachers will try to, or not teachers, but they're being told to try to intimidate you into taking the test, your child. So when you start to say things to your principal, I want to opt out, I want to boycott the test, they will start, especially if your student is a high flyer, what we call high achieving students, they want those scores because those scores raise school grades. And so if you are deciding to opt your child out, they must invalidate the test, because no score is better than a low score. And a lot of people think, oh, do you get a 0 on it if you invalidate the test? No. There is an actual code that happens when your son or daughter invalidates the test. So for computer-based testing, what they will most likely do, and you need to check specifically for Delaware because every state is different, but what they would do is go to their computer, you know, they're put in front of a computer, they go to the first screen, I believe they have to like type a code, and the next screen they have to say, I promise not to say what was on this test, whatever. And then they go to question number 1. And what they do is they allow the time to run out. And what that does is it invalidates the test because you have opened the test, basically, and you have not answered any questions. Another thing that you can do on paper pencil tests is break the seal of the test and then not answer them. Once the seal is broken on a paper test, then it is invalidated. Now, an invalidation score in Florida is called an NR2. In Delaware, I'm not sure what it's called. You will have to go to your Department of Education, and you'll have to hunt for that information. They don't put that out there for you to know. I also suggest that you team up with some United Opt-out groups. I'm sure there is one in Delaware, but if you would like, you can go to unitedoptout.org, and they have opt-out guides for every single state that tells you what you need to do for what state. You can also go to conversationed.com/webinar, and I did a webinar with Opt Out Orlando, and we talk about the entire process of opting out and what you need to do. There are sample opt-out letters, other steps, procedures that you need to take. There's a PowerPoint presentation with all the information you need in terms of opting out of the test. Some school districts have actually voiced that they will accommodate parents who are planning on invalidating the test. So once your child breaks the seal, or once your child goes to the first question and your teacher knows that they are opting out, they can then take them to the library and allow them to read or do whatever they need to do if your library is not being used for testing. And some schools are accommodating, but some schools will make your child sit in what we call sit and stare. So that's why it's not for the faint of heart. If you're planning on boycotting these exams, you're pushing up against some big money, and it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of perseverance to do so. But what I suggest is you get 5 or 6 other people in your school that want to do the same. Go to any opt-out organizations in your area, and they can help you more on that. But the only way to stop the machine is to deny the fuel, and the fuel are the tests, so boycott the assessments.
All right, thank you. Senator, I want to address a slightly related question real quick that came to mind. One is opting out at an individual level. Did you mention at some point to me that some districts are delaying the testing? I mean, that's another.
I don't think I did. I don't know of any that
Is Chicago
are
doing
by
that?
law.
Chicago is doing something.
I don't know.
All right, let's skip it. Next question. Okay. Why should states repeal Common Core when David Coleman is head of the College Board and is aligning the SAT with Common Core, thus making it mandatory for students to leave Common Core, to learn Common Core material.
I'll do that.
Okay?
I got asked this in the New York State Senate. If your kids are taking a clean math course, which means you're getting all the way up to the possibility of calculus, and the SAT has dumbed math down, guess how your kids are going to do? So, sometimes you can't just let one individual dictate education policy in the whole country. You need to step up and do what's right for your children. It is true that he has made the SAT align with Common Core. It is also true that now we have over 1,000 colleges who have looked at the dumbing down of the SAT and said they're not using it anymore as part of their admissions system. So we're seeing a pushback from the college level against the dumbing down of tests like the SAT. And if your kids get a non-dumbed down curriculum, they'll do really well on a test that was dumbed down.
Okay.
There is an alternative, and that was what I mentioned earlier, having each state develop its own matriculation exams by its own institutions of higher ed. Then that removes the need to take SATs, ACTs altogether. They came into being around 1900. One has to understand why we have an SAT. And that was because at that time, after the Committee of 10 in 1890 had done its work, there were a lot of colleges that had a lot of complaining parents, Ivy Leaguers. They were taking their kids to all these 6 different colleges, and they wanted one test that could be useful for all of them. We need to undo all of that and go back to the situation where instead of each individual college, each individual state, like countries, develops its own matriculation exam. This is, as we said earlier, what a lot of other countries do. And then that is all that a child has to take if they want to go to a university in their own state. If they want to go to one in another state, private schools can do as they wish.
Okay.
I'm not going to worry about them.
All right, this one is directed to Kathleen. What is the reason Jeb Bush continues to support Common Core? Where does he stand to gain, financial or otherwise?
My father told me before I came here not to get political, but I have a really hard time doing that. Jeb Bush was head of the Foundation for Excellence in Education, which is heavily funded by Pearson, who makes the park. Recently, Condoleezza Rice, I think this was like 2 days ago or yesterday, Condoleezza Rice is now in charge of Excellence for Education because Jeb Bush is now running for president, and I guess he can't be
You can't be part of a nonprofit and
Yeah.
do political work.
So now that's Condoleezza Rice's bag. But Jeb Bush and Pearson, they are very much in it together. You can pull up emails online very easily between the two, Education and Excellence for Education and Pearson. And so it's just another one of those things of lining the pockets and policy happening because of money and exchanges of money. What might have started off as a way to make education better got muddied a long, long time ago when independent contractors lined up to provide the services. And so that's that's the way politics work. You scratch my back, I scratch yours, I pass laws that'll make your company money.
Yeah.
So that's why. But I'm not getting political.
That's right. I mean, this is the kind of question where I wish we had a fuller panel, because it's a very important conversation. So hopefully, next time that question gets answered, but it really goes to motivations, that people are truly immersed on the Common Core side.
The good news is education is at the forefront of the political dialogue, where it used to be like number 18 or 19 on the list. With Jeb Bush running, it will be at the forefront, and that's what I'm happy about.
That's right.
Okay, next question. My daughter has been discouraged and almost reprimanded for trying to help her 7-year-old daughter.
What?
Is it common to not include parents in the learning process in Common Core?
Sadly, in too many cases, the answer to that question is yes. As I travel the states, I actually have done town hall meetings where parents have stood up and testified that their little ones come home and say, the teacher teaches and mommy's supposed to be quiet. So we're hearing that happen in more and more cases. Those are anecdotal, obviously, situations, but when you hear it in multiple states from people who have no connection to each other, that's of great concern. I was in New York, and parents asked the question about communication, and the response was, from the district folks, was, well, we just need to do better at marketing this to you. And what I said is, that's not communication. A sales pitch is not communication. So you were told not to help your daughter. Well, kids are being told, and again, I'm hearing this anecdotally from a number of sources, firsthand, parents themselves, that their kids are being told, don't ask mommy or don't ask daddy. So, you know, there does seem to be a real antipathy to parents in too many circles that are involved in this. I won't say everyone because I haven't seen a research study, but anecdotally, I'm hearing that way too often.
All right. All right,
Well, and I just have a question about that. So is somebody at Common Core State Standards telling them not to talk to parents? I mean, what's going on there?
What I'm hearing is that schools that are doing Common Core, parents are standing up, and what they're telling me, and audiences like this one, is that our school is doing Common Core, and this is what we're being told. Our children are coming home and saying this, and parents are intensely frustrated, and it's the basis of conversation that's happening in many states. I haven't seen a study. I can only tell you that's anecdotal evidence, but I've heard it in more than one situation.
And so I can tell you that from the other side, I'm doing all of these workshops in schools in Illinois and Minnesota and Ohio and other states, and they're saying, the parents or the teachers are saying to me, you know, we've got parents that want to know how to help their students, help us to be able to communicate that with them. How can we help our parents so that they can make that transition better? So I think this is one place where I think we need to say, whoa, is it really Common Core's fault, or is there something going on that within our own area that we need to do a double check on?
Okay.
That's what I would do.
all right, a quick follow-up for you, Judy, the second part, real quick. How do language immersion programs relate to Common Core?
Well, that's a tough one, language immersion. When I was a principal in Chicago, we had 500 high school students. It was an inner city. Of those 500, 100 were non-English speaking students. And so we had a very large ESL program. And so, to be honest, and this again comes back to my feelings about standardized tests, is that there's a problem there. You know, they're still thinking in this language, and academically they're not thinking in English yet, and yet at some point they're required to take tests.
Arnie Duncan gave us 1 year, though. He gave us a year.
Oh, a whole year?
Yeah. So you get a year, and then you got to learn it, and then you
Yeah.
got to take the test.
Yeah.
Duncan.
Which will be very detrimental to kids
Who's
for whom
he?
that's a problem.
Does he rule Florida?
Well, he said that in terms of the standardized tests and what is going on for ELL and LEP implications, that he's pushing towards 1 year for states to give, so you get a
them
year
But in
off.
other words, Duncan sees himself in charge.
Oh, yeah.
For years.
I mean, this is your federal role in education.
He's
right
never
there.
he's never taught in a classroom either.
Thank you. Okay, the next question, I think this person is a novelist. He took both sides, or she took both sides.
Wow.
Even though at a given point, 6th grade, 11th grade, et cetera, our students may not be as advanced as other students internationally, why should we change our system given we continue to be number one in the world in every category that is really meaningful? Our healthcare system, university system, innovation, ingenuity, et cetera. In fact, many of the world's greatest students are educated here, and many wind up choosing to work and live here.
Oh.
Sandra?
At the risk of sounding paranoid, for some people, that is exactly the reason why they want to change it.
Yeah.
Okay. Kathleen, do you have a comment?
Well, I think that, along with what Dr. Stosky said, is that these tests, these standards are designed a certain way, and I believe them to be designed in a way to keep certain people in positions that they are in, and that when you design a system where only affluent people have a chance at passing the tests, you tend to create a society that you want.
Okay.
I would recommend that the audience read a document called America's choice. Tough times or tough choices. If you Google tough times or tough choices, you'll find it. It is written by the National Center for Education and the Economy. It's actually a revamp of an earlier document called America's Choice, High Skills or Low Wages. It works from what's called the Commission on the New American Workforce. And it is a revamp of and Delaware has signed on to the Commission for the New American Workforce, by the way. And what the document says is that by the end of 10th grade, the children will have to take a test, and if they pass the test, they'll be allowed to continue high school. It's called a common school, not a high school. There actually is a graph in the document. It's called a common school. And if they pass it at a low level, they'll be allowed to go into a technical area. If they pass it at a higher level, they'll be allowed to continue into high school and then have to pass another test to go to a university. The document says we're not actually sorting because kids can keep taking that 10th grade level test for your whole life. So you have multiple chances to pass it, but you can't go further in education until you do pass it. It says it will save $6 billion in education because you'll have much fewer people in the higher levels of high school, and that the problem is local school districts won't comply, so it calls for instead of there being local school boards who can direct education policy, there will be a state curriculum, there will be charter schools, the teachers will all work for the state, they'll have to teach the state curriculum and pass the state assessment, and all the local school boards will be allowed to do is choose which contracting entity they would like to hire to implement this whole program. It's called the Commission on the New American Workforce. Delaware has signed on to it, and it's a National Center for Education and the Economy document, and you can find it online.
Okay, thank you.
And once again, I ask, where are we?
Right.
That would have been my question too, but there it is.
Okay, this one, I think gets back to some of the data, but I'm not sure. Can you expand on room to workforce, how the objective and subjective info is being used and how it might be used 10 years from now? It's pretty conjectural, but you talk about that.
Let me give you a history lesson. Maybe that will help. I come from Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania was one of the incubator states for testing. We were one of the states that originally did a lot of this testing. It was called the Educational Quality Assessment, the EQA. It was first discovered by a mother whose 8th grade child came home and said, I took this weird test, and when he told her, she didn't believe him, and she went down to the school and said, can I see the test? And they said, no. And she said, wrong answer. She eventually found it. Pennsylvania had to enter into a consent agreement with the federal government saying they wouldn't do it anymore. What did the test test? The title said citizenship. You would think that would mean Supreme Court, how long's the president? It tested for locus of control. Are you internally controlled or externally controlled? And it said it in the documents. It tested for a child's willingness to accept change without protest. It tested for thresholds of behavior changed. I would do this thing if or if or if. The results of that test were then used by the federal government in validated research projects that were validated not in Pennsylvania, that to change the way that the child would score on that test in the future. And the districts got it back as curriculum improvement projects, resources for curriculum improvement that were aimed at changing the values and attitudes of the children. And this was done in the 70s. And I actually have all of those documents. It created a ruckus. As we move forward, in the 1990s, then it was called outcome-based education, and the outcomes included, and I'm again quoting, the child will be honest enough to graduate, will respond appropriately to different forms of humor, will tolerate various lifestyles. And so I went, again, living in Pennsylvania, I went and read the state assessments. I got the secretary to let me in, and I sat down and read them, and this is a real example. This story was about a little one a child who found a wallet, and there was money in it. What would you do with the money? And the story was all about that. And the questions, what did the child find? A wallet, literal comprehension. If you, meaning talking to the kid taking the test, found a wallet with money in it, would you keep the money? And I turned the paper around and said, do you read better if you say yes? Or do you read better if you say no? Or did you just test the honesty of the children in a standardized test with the children's name upon it? Now, we know they've done that. We know that's been happening. What they're going to do in the future, right now they're a little more quiet, so we're digging But since we know that that's the history, we know that that's what they've done, it would be reasonable to assume that that's where they're going.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to go out of my protocol, and Karen had a question, and she hasn't handed it to me, but since she's been so helpful, I'm going to ask Karen's question. And that dealt with hearing from teachers in this process, both for and against. Why are the teachers not more included in things like this? And then secondarily, for those who are against Common Core, is it difficult for them career-wise to speak out?
I can tell you that we are not seeing a whole lot of teachers standing up, whether it's fear, complacency, whatever it is. I know there are some teachers in the room, but mainly when we go to school board meetings or any kind of national situation, most of the people in the audience are parents. We would like to see the conversation shift towards teachers, because I believe that a lot of this would change immediately if teachers got together and changed this conversation. There are more teachers than there are of them, meaning the people imposing these ridiculous mandates on school districts and teachers, particularly regarding your VAM scores, and these are teacher terms, parents may not understand this, but the value-added model that is used to evaluate teachers based on test scores is flawed at best, and it has really hurt the profession of teaching. What I'm trying to teach in terms of at the College of Education, I'm trying to get new teachers to fight for their position. So I have gone away from the normal curriculum of, College of Education and moved more into teaching teachers how to be activists, because too many teachers are not engaging in the conversation. And whether it's fear, or they're too busy or bogged down or whatever it is, the problem with not including educators in this conversation is that it's being hijacked by people that don't know a whole lot about education. And so if you are a teacher in the room, thank you for being here. And then for the next one, go grab 8 or 9 of your teacher friends and bring them, because teachers are completely missing from the conversation. They were missing from the construction of the standards. They were missing from writing the test items. They're missing from school board meetings and decision-making meetings. And, they're missing here today. We only saw a few hands raised when we said, are there teachers here? And thank God there are teachers here, but there needs to be more, because they are on the front lines. They are seeing this in the buildings. I think that we talk about standards and we talk about testing, and you'll hear Arnie Duncan or people in positions of power that are imposing these standards on and testing onto our students. We don't hear from the people in the buildings every single day that are dealing with what the repercussions are because of these policies that have been put in place.
Okay.
Everything looks nice on paper until you get into a building and you start seeing the way this impacts education at the building level with teachers and students.
Excuse me, could I just add to what
Yes.
has been said?
This is actually the last question, so if you have something to say real quickly,
I would
this is
just
the question
add to
do
what
it.
Kathleen has said from
Sure.
her work and observations at the local level. It's very difficult to get your hands on actual written policies, evidence of some kind, of a directive coming from on high. We know they're there. I was at a Greater Peoria meeting a few months ago, Illinois, and it was a meeting that was scheduled for teachers. Only 2 showed up. One of them was the union rep, who said that the word insubordinate was being used for teachers' personnel folders if they even showed up at a meeting where there would be criticisms of Common Core, and that this could be defined in any way a local school district, meaning the administration, could choose to define it. It was not, as we understood it, a policy approved by any local school board. It was simply administrative, and it was coming through administrative channels from a State Department of Ed and so on, a Commissioner of Ed. So the word insubordinate may be somewhere floating there, but we haven't been able, and there are a number of us who've tried to find evidence of written directives. He is on the record for what he said at this meeting, because the meeting was videotaped, and he was willing to speak up and was safe because he was a union rep from his area.
Great. Peg, do you have any last comments here?
To follow up on what Sandra said, I'm seeing that as well. Again, people, they're not There's not written directives, but even here in Delaware, we've had teachers at meetings that have been videotaped saying that they've been discouraged from coming, discouraged from speaking out. I was in Philadelphia, and the teachers mobbed me at the end. I didn't realize there was a room full of teachers, but I was, and they all reiterated that they were being told they weren't allowed to complain, they're not allowed to speak out. Many of them are saying they're just going to quit, that they just won't participate in it. So the same in New York and in other states that I've been at. So I'm seeing it sadly as a pattern of teachers being told, which if you're talking about medical things, why would you tell the doctors to be quiet? When you're talking about education things, it really doesn't make any sense to tell the teachers to be quiet. Because as Catherine said, they're the ones on the front lines who know what does this look like in a classroom? What does this look like with children? And yet those are the voices that are not heard. And in many cases, we're hearing they're being told to be silent.
Great. Judy,
Be insubordinate.
Judy, do you
Power
have,
to the people.
Judy, do you have anything to say on this?
Practicing classroom teachers were invited to be up on this DS today.
Well, I'm a practicing classroom teacher, so
You're still teaching?
I teach in the College of Education, yes.
I'm talking about K through 12.
We asked every organization, we sent this to every school board, this invitation to every school board, every high school, every elementary school, to the State Board of Education, to the Secretary of Education, and all declined. With that, and we have to wrap it up, and I want to thank you all for coming. Someone asked me if they can make a donation so that we can have this thing again in the late summer or early fall. If you wish to make a donation, you could do that out the back desk where you're signing up the form. You can just make it out if you want to write a check to FFCD and put education in the bottom, and we'll put all that money in a fund to hold a symposium. And Kathleen and Judy and Sandra and Peg, we hope you'll come and be part of that and help us design that so it's done correctly.
Thanks for
all
being nice to me.
Thank you, wonderful
All right,
ladies.
and one thing here, let's give a round of applause for John Riddell and his 100 iterations they had to do to get this thing put together. Thank you, John.